how many fish do I want to catch? So I left. Tomorrow?
Good evening. Let's open our work session. Mr. Yearout, do you want to begin? Commissioner Iasca will be here presently.
Okay. Mayor, Commissioners, what we're here to talk about tonight is the land bank, where we are, and which is at the very beginning, and where we might want to go, and how that can work. We've also got a guest speaker, if you will, with us this evening, who's going to do this PowerPoint presentation just shortly. I just want to give a brief overview for everyone to kind of make sure everyone knows where we are. As noted in the cover memo, in March, the City Commission formally enacted the ordinance to establish the land bank. Under the statutes, you're required to name a board of trustees, which can be the governing body. That's what you did. So in effect, the ordinance is in effect. The land bank exists, but it has nothing else that is adopted or enacted. Those that are in operation, we've got copies of documentation. I included the ones that came from the City of Lyons because Mr. Sweet, the administrator, is going to give you this presentation shortly with respect to what they're doing. But the policies that we see from primarily Wyandotte County, the unified government, and also from the City of Hutchinson, they've got some very specific policies, some guidelines, some rules and regulations governing how they manage the properties, what they're going to do with respect to making those properties available for reuse and resale, which would be the basis on which we would use to establish any kind of a purchase contract if you ever reach that point in time. We've done some research. I've had conversations with the county councilor's office regarding the properties that were on the big map that we gave you last week, and I've got that we'll put up on the screen as well. Those were the properties that were offered at the tax sales over the last 2 years that did not sell and are sitting there essentially right now, at least according to the county councilor by statute, in the name of the county, even though if you look online, they're still going to show the original owner's name. But they are available for transfer to the land bank under the statutory process if the land bank desires to take that. And that's part of ultimately the process we're going to have to go through and discuss with you all. Before I get in, unless you've got any specific general questions like that, would like to introduce John Sweet. John is the city administrator for the City of Lyons. Shortly after the statutes were revised in, I believe, '09, that enabled other communities across the state to establish land banks. The City of Lyons did that. On a much smaller scale, they've got similar problems and issues dealing with some development that did not occur, even though the city had financed the infrastructure, much like what we're doing, just a smaller scale. And they also use it in some of the other properties that they have issues with within the community, and John's going to talk about that. Other than found out John's been the administrator there for the last 13 years, city of about 3,700 people. It's the county seat of Rice County, about 30 miles due west of McPherson, if you're not familiar with where it is from here. And other than the scale, some of the same issues, and that's the reality of working in local government. I know Cheryl knows very well. Community to community, the issues to a great degree remain the same, the names, the faces, and often the scale changes, but a lot of the issues are the same. So, John, I'm going to give it to you and let you go through your presentation, and then we'll open up for discussion.
Okay, thank you. As he said, my name is John Sweet. I'm the city administrator of Lyons, Kansas. I get involved with a lot of things in the state because I get bored. We get a lot of projects, a lot of programs going on in our community, and we're always looking for new things that come out from the state, particularly when it is an enhancement to the community. And we have to remember, and I'm a city administrator, I'm city staff, we're really got an excellent mayor and an excellent council, and they set policy, we execute the policy. And it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, because being a retired colonel in the Marines, you give me my directions, and by gosh, we're going to march to that tune. We got a great staff, got it real organized. We have about 34 full-time personnel. But this tool we're going to talk about is just one of those economic tools to me. It's an economic tool. It's also a management tool for properties that pretty much are abandoned or abused or lack of detention, lack of control, or those that you run into problems dealing with financial issues with a corporation that you may have had an agreement with. We had one on a similar scale dealing with a housing development. And since then, we've taken control over that through the land bank program. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But I do want to tell you, land bank in itself is not the answer. You've got to have a good plan for the future. You've got to understand the land use that you want to do. You got to look at the zoning regulations that you have associated with that, and then tie it into other programs that both the state and the federal has as well as you have. And we're going to talk about Brownsfields, how that works, neighborhood revitalization, how that works in this program, and how do you take properties over that get specials and you can't get the specials. The property belongs to the city at this point in time. You're taking the specials out of your general fund or out of funds to manage that. You're reducing your overall effectiveness of your staff because you got to take away services at that point in time, or you got to increase the tax base to get that back in. So how do you get rid of that debt? Ours was on a real small scale, and it was about 40 lots. And we'll talk about how we got there and what we came out of this. But we weren't the first city to enact the land bank program. You know, Wyandotte County, state had special programs and processes in place for Wyandotte County, and they actually put that into place. And then there was a couple other communities that jumped on board along with us, and we were looking. And I really took some of the programs for both Wyandotte County and others. We reviewed it, got the city attorney involved. We looked at the process. We had some work sessions similar to this. We discussed it at length, and we decided that any property that the city of Lyons that wasn't actively using, whether it be vacant lots in the industrial park or whatever it may be, automatically got moved to the land bank. Now, our city council, and we have an 8-ward council and a mayor, elected a mayor, they are actuality not just our public building commission, but they're also our land bank committee. So we formed that around the nucleus, and it just makes sense. And so when we want to do a land bank meeting, I normally, like council meeting went Monday night, and we want to do a land bank meeting on the 21st of July, and we do it 15 minutes prior to our council meeting. Because these are quick. They don't take long for decisions to be made. And we normally, what we do is we get the documentation in their packet, read ahead. And so when we go there, I read the issue, explain what the issue is. The individual who wants to buy the property or transfer the property is available. They're there at council. If the council has a question, they don't get up and talk unless the council has a specific question associated with that, and it's directed. Most of this is very simple. We don't do land contracts, we do quick claim deeds. So you do a request for transfer of the property to the city. We get our city attorney, we get our abstractor to review it to ensure there's nothing out there that we're going to get stuck with when we transfer that property to us, like a lien or something else. And then we take it over a quick claim deed, the council or the land bank committee approves it. Next day I get it recorded, the property's transferred to us. Then we start looking for avenues, what are we going to do with that property, really making sure that we have a good direction to go. Because we don't want our property out there that nobody wants, because we're going to end up cutting that grass for 3 to 4 years before it goes to sale. Then after it goes to sale, we most likely end up cutting that grass again for another 3 years. So what we want to do is get it back in the economic development program. We want that land to be used and be taxed, and we get the property. So it's back into use in the community. And we'll talk about that as well. See if I can move this thing. Again, Wyandotte County was, I guess, the first one, and they did it in 1996 with special legislation. Then the House Bill 2155 gave us the allowance to do that as well. It's one of those privileges that we don't want to ever abuse because you lose it, like neighborhood revitalization. You never want to do a citywide NRA because it doesn't meet state statutes. And we have some cities and counties who say, well, I'm just going to do economic development and give somebody a good boost, and that will create some issues. In our housing development, what we did when we first established it, we did a neighborhood revitalization area to give an incentive to build. And we put it on a 5-year declining scale, starting out at 85% tax rebate for the taxes, down to 20% at the end of the 5th year. They were paying 100%. The idea was just to give them some rebate. The existing property taxes, they still pay. The specials, they were still going to pay. That was our initial outset associated. We built 3 homes with those categories. Each of those homes in the city of Lyons was over $300,000, which was a pretty good incentive, I mean, to be honest with you. The specials were around $15,000 total for each lot when we ended up with being. But we didn't have, remember, when we started this program, land bank didn't exist. So we had a good contract. We went out for bids to develop this property. And the idea was that it was an abandoned property that the school district had, and I wanted housing, because housing, without adequate housing, economic development doesn't thrive. The old thing, chicken between the egg and all that, I'm going to tell you something. You don't have good housing, you're not going to get economic development. You don't have the programs and housing available, I don't care what it is, they're not going to come to your community. We actually had a business come to Lyons, move to Lyons, had a choice of 3 different locations, was given some economic incentives to go to those other communities, chose Lyons because of our housing program. Now, I could talk all night about the different housing programs that we've got. We've done over 80 homes in our community with housing rehab and put over $20,000 worth of rehab in each one of those homes. Hadn't cost the city of Lyons a penny. We've done land bank, or not land bank, but we've done home rehabilitation with landlords as well, and right now we're doing 14 of them. The landlord pays 25%, the city pays 75% through the grant. We don't pay anything, and that's another 20 homes right there. We're doing a housing moderate income, building 8 houses right now, 147,000, 3-bedroom house, 1,300 square feet, full basement, all energy efficiency through a grant through the moderate income, and we're going to give them a $25,000 grant to move in tomorrow, eliminate the specials, no permit fees, and so forth. Hell of an incentive. It's about $50,000. But the idea was to keep some of our business professionals and our school teachers who in the community for at least 5 years, because they got to live in the house for 5 years for the grant to take place. If they leave early, they got to pay it back. We do the Habitat for Humanity. We get the lots of the land bank and give them to them for free. And we've built about 7 homes through that process too. We did a $2.5 million tax credit with a housing program, and we had those lots from the land bank. We purchased the lots, we did the land bank, we transferred the land bank the lots to the Chodo, and the Chodo platted them out, and when they built the 8, I think there's 6 homes and 2 duplexes for a total of 10. Again, the City of Lyons' investment was buying the property at that point, talking about $30,000 total investment. But we ended up with 6 new homes and 2 duplexes out of that. So that was a key associated with that. So what is a land bank? You've already gone through this process, so I'm going to run through this real quick. But a land bank is that entity which can be used to facilitate the acquisition, disposition of real property. We're not talking about, hopefully, we're not getting involved in buildings. I don't want to get involved with buildings. I want to get involved with property. Now, we've taken property that had buildings on it that needed to be demolished, and what the council has done is in those dilapidated structures, particularly with those people who couldn't qualify to pay for those lots for demolishment, we had them do a quick claim deed to the land bank. Then we in turn demolished it, and then the land bank then put the property back to use. For instance, one was to put the adjacent property owner for a garage, 3-story garage, or 3-car garage was adjacent to that. One of the lots was built because of a fire, and he didn't want to pay for the gas line to be removed, which was about $300, so he just donated a lot to the land bank, and we're going to give that to the landlord who has a rental next door, and he's going to build a garage on it. So that's just 2 examples of how we use the land bank other than just the traditional land bank that you hear about. So we're actually looking at those properties out there. Our city inspector is going out actively. I go out every 6 months with a city inspector town-wide, and we look at properties that are dilapidated, and we issue the notice for demolishment or repair. It comes to council. If they come in and get a building permit to start the process, we take them off the list. But they got 6 months to do it. If they don't do it, we put them back on the list and they come back in front of the city council. At that point in time, the council, with the individual, will make a decision how to proceed. What we found, those who can't afford it, that most of the time don't want the lot, they transfer it to the land bank. We had a gentleman who had 2 house lots. Both houses were just, and I'm talking about within the last 30 days, wanted to move out of the community, wanted to move back to his homestead in New Orleans. He couldn't sell the property. He requested the council take over the property and demolish the lots. We demolished one of the structures through a CDBG grant program, which was free, and we did the other, which the total cost, and we just got the bids yesterday, for 2 structures was $4,000. For us, that was a high bid. Most of the bids we get are around $2,000, $2,500 for demolishment. So that's the program. The key characteristics associated, ad valorem tax benefits. Okay, you're going to get that property back on in that market and for you so that you can get that tax base and get it back into the system. I don't like the streamlined purchase and sell because most of the time we sell the program, sell a lot. I think the most expensive lot we're going to sell is on the 21st. We're going to sell a vacant lot in our housing development to the adjacent building where he's building a building. He wants to pay $2,000 for the lot, and he said he would assume the specials. What a deal. Okay, so we gave him the lot, right? And we paid the specials for the house that he's on, and he's got a $25,000 grant for a $147,000 house to move in it. Now he wants to buy the lot beside it. We're winning because we get the taxes off the house because he's not getting tax abatement or rebate off associated with that, plus the property tax. And the 21st of July, City Council or Land Bank Committee will review it. They didn't approve it the first time, but they brought him back. They put it on hold. I think more so instead of establishing a precedent, what the mayor and the council wanted to do was review it and then make a decision at the next land bank, which made sense. Let's see. Oh, the formation, we already established. You have to do it by ordinance, which you've done, correct? Okay. The trustees are the governing body, which you have done. And I strongly support the issue of governing body. What you want to do is 3 years from now be looking at a process which you want to do and have a committee that you establish that differs from your viewpoint. That you don't need it because that disunity, and I'm not saying that would happen, but I have seen it happen in another community. Not in Lyons, but in another one. So you want to make sure you do it. Operation. City can advance operating funds to assist in this if you want to. Subject to open records and open meeting statutes. Any organization you do is core coma. Statutory fiscal and budget requirements include cash basis law. We put ours in the budget underneath the general fund, and we put it underneath the administration side of the house, and it's just called land bank. It's a land bank expense. If we get revenue as a result of the sale, it's in our general fund under what we call Fund 10, but it's in reimbursed expenses. We don't have a separate fund to cover and watch the land bank sales that we do. We just didn't see the necessity to do it. If we need to, when our auditor comes down the line, we've been doing it for 4 years that way and nobody's questioned it. Required to manage property and land bank. You really need to watch this and you really need to have real good controls. Wyandotte County's got 2,000 lots right now. There's no way in, pardon my French, hell they can manage that. They don't have the staff. Now I got a staff of 2 people. Community development coordinator, and a city inspector. That's it. And we manage very well what we got going, and we actually do a lot of bartering, trade with the individual homeowners and so forth. It's your advertising your program. We actually have people that know more about our program than we because we've advertised it so much, and I put it on the city channel, put it on the website, and so forth. They actually come to us when there's an issue to get rid of their property. We can retain the proceeds from the sale of properties. Now remember, because you bring it in the land bank, there's no more taxes. Your specials, you may have to, you still got to sort the specials, but the taxes themselves are none. The neighborhood or advisory committee we use is our planning commission. In our planning commission, we have established what is called the community development board. That community development board has representatives from all the major taxing entities with the county, the school district, the hospital district. We have the Chamber of Commerce. These are principals that are on the board, myself and our community development coordinator. And what we do is we look at our capital improvement programs, we look at our comprehensive plan, we advise the planning commission, who then advises the city council on recommended directions and proceeds and to change the company. But they also look at this land bank. Property acquisition. Now, I heard you talking about the county owns the property, it's going to transfer it back, because I'm assuming it's in the city limits, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And this is an investment that you did with general obligation bonds or revenue bonds?
Obligation. General obligation bond.
General obligation, GO bonds. Same process we did. Our scale, just remember, if I got 40 lots with a population of 3,700, look at your population, do the division, maybe it's equal to it. And I'm sure your revenue is probably a little bit higher than our revenue that we get in our ad valorem property tax. We're at 51 million. You can't do meal comparisons like apples and oranges, but we're probably about 567,000. I will tell you that our economic development and our real estate balance on property values has risen 40% in 10 years. We've got new businesses, and all of it deals with a lot of things, but one of the things I believe in the last couple of years has been the land bank. We wouldn't have got the housing we got without the land bank program into place. Can be donated or purchased by the land bank. The only purchasing that we have done is through a sure sale. We bought 3 lots, and I really didn't want to do that, to be frank about it. I wanted the county to give it to us. So I stopped doing that, and I got the city's concurrence not to do that. And the reason why is we never get any of the money back. And the reason why we were doing it was to quit this old thing of people buying empty lots for investment, living outside the state, and then holding it for 3 to 4 years, thinking they're going to get a big, payback return. They paid $50. If they get $300, that's a good payback. And I'm going to tell you something. There's a lot of people who do that statewide. A lot of people. We can acquire free and clear delinquent taxes, and you know more about that from the attorney's perspective than I will ever be able to clear. But the key is I don't have to worry about that stuff. From the city's perspective, once we get it, we hold it in land bank. I got to worry about those taxes and stuff. Specials I still do. For instance, we have a special for trash, and I think it's $50 per lot for commercial. So I know I got to pay that. So I put that in the budget to make sure I cover that for each of the lots I got. And I don't know if you have those types of specials with your residential lots with the county or not. Something you have to keep in mind. So property management. Who would be your property manager? Okay, you're going to do the policies, the land bank committee, but who's going to execute that policy? Your city manager, and then from your city manager, who's the staff that she's got? You all need to make sure you got a good process in mind and who's going to be responsible for what before you execute it. Because when you do your land bank committee, it should not be part of your city council. So when you do your land bank committee meeting, you put it up and here's the meeting, and then you go through the action items. At the end of it, adjourn the land bank committee. Then you start your city council meeting up. The reason why, coma, don't mix the two together, because you're the land bank committee, but you're also city council. So we go early, we adjourn the land bank committee about 5 minutes before we do city council meeting. It just precludes any issues with the community or with the state adjutant general's office as well. Look at your potential future uses. And remember, zoning is the key critical. You don't want to do spot zoning. For instance, this commercial entity comes in the middle of your residential, says, listen, I'll buy 20, 50 lots from you as long as you let me put an industrial in there. Don't do that, because you kill the development, and that's not land bank management. I mean, in fact, you kill your zoning, and it's called spot zoning, right? You don't want to do spot zoning. There are places that have it, and it doesn't work out. Temporary use property for a public purpose. You're going to hear me talk about it. We had a tornado come through in 2012. Oh, dilapidated school. It wasn't dilapidated. It was an old school from 1910. It had been hit 3 times by tornadoes, and they rebuilt it. They weren't rebuilding it this time. So I went to the owner of the property, and they asked for economic development. Is there some funds we can get? And basically, there wasn't any. It wasn't on the historical register, number 1. 2, the building had pretty much collapsed on the side. But it was adjacent to a park. What was my first thought? Expand the park. So that's exactly what we did. Got the city council, we land bank, we discussed it. The acquisition was free. We had to demolish it. We went out for bids. It cost us $2,200 to demolish and remove all the items. We go out to bids to 22 different general contractors for demolishment, and that's why we get such good bids. I mean, I had bids from $2,000 all the way up to $15,000 to $20,000. So what you got to do, if you're going to manage this from a land bank and you're taking over dilapidated properties, don't go out to the 3 in your community. Go for a region-wide, and I assure you, you're going to get real good bids. The majority of the bids that we get are from one of our contractors that live in our community who realizes that if he doesn't bid it right, he's not going to get it, because our city council isn't going to play this game. You live in the community, you're going to get the bid no matter what. We do it based on our procurement policy that says the low bid gets the product. Now, if I'm rambling, you please let me know, and if I'm giving you stuff that you don't want to hear, let me know that too. I have a tendency to try to mirror all this together for you. Maintain records and account. Okay. I'm a real true believer that you need to know your fixed assets. This is a fixed asset. It's a plan account item. So you should have a file set up for every land bank property. You should have it like a 3-inch binder if you want to go that way. And in that should be the quitclaim deed, a copy of it. You should also have the legal, the aerial from the legal, and you should have all the information resident and associated property. So if someone comes in and says, I'm looking for a lot to build, you open up your book and it's there. Most of the time what happens is we're not prepared to discuss this issue with someone. They go find something else. So your management has to be able to make that decision. And I'm just talking about residential. I didn't talk about commercial. In commercial, if you're not prepared to do that, you can run into some serious issues. Now, we've done that, and it works great through commercial as well. We have a new hotel. We have a new assisted living facility. We got new residential housing, which I call economic development. One of the properties we got rid of was through Brownsfield's, another support program. We got rid of an old gas station. Originally, it was going to be an accounting firm. The bank bought the property, and they're now using it for a drive-through with the ATM machine, which is okay for me because the property taxes on the ATM machine was higher than what they were going to do on the accounting machine, from the county's perspective. So I thought that was pretty good. Okay, where and to whom sells the property? Be very careful of this, that if you have somebody that comes in and wants to obtain the property, they should define what the use is. What you don't want to do is give the property to somebody that's looking for an investment, because you're going to sell a lot for $100, and they're going to try to turn around and resell the lot. Because what they're going to do is they're not going to take care of the lot, and you're going to end up doing what? Cutting the grass, maintaining it, sending them notice of violation. So please make sure that you as a land bank committee understand what you're going to do with that lot and that you agree to it. Don't do bidding. Don't go out and say, I got this lot. I've heard somebody's doing that in the state. You really run into problems. You want to put the property back into use in your community. This one place said, I can get $5,000, so instead of getting rid of the lot for $2,000, let's bid it out and get $5,000 to $6,000 off the lot. That gives us a little bit of extra money. If you're going in this to make money, it's in the wrong deed. You're putting it in there to get the property back into protective use for your community.
Can you do that as part of a contract to define what the use is? That sounds very
Give them
strict.
timeframes.
Right.
And I put that in the quick claim deed. I wouldn't go too far with a contract.
Well, you could do it with a contract and with, certainly you would with commercial property.
Deed, whatever.
But you could have covenants and contracts that survive closing. You can do it by deed restriction as well. But it's got to be, enforceable post-closing.
Right.
But yes, you can.
In our case, we're going to sell this lot to this next-door neighbor who wants to build a garage with a house. We're going to put some language in our quick claim deed that says you can't do the following. What we don't want to do is see him come in with a portable shed that detracts from the neighborhood or do something that's really out of the ordinary. So it's basically going to say if you're going to put a building up there, it requires the land bank committee's approval prior to putting it in. And as also the language is going to be. Because you get into this thing about aesthetics. Does this look right? Does this not look good? And then it becomes a choice. Instead of doing that, just say you got to get the building approved by the land bank committee. Simple as that. Okay, does that make sense?
Sure.
It just precludes that issue. There's your term, conditions, restrictions, and covenants necessary to support that effective reutilization. You can rebate it all of ad valorem. I don't think property taxes we don't worry about. Ad valorem, once you get that property, there is no taxes. You start at that point in getting them. Special assessments, though, you're still subject to special assessments. We don't get rid of them, except where we're doing with this housing program, because they're building a house. What we're going to do is take the property taxes and pay our specials. Does that make sense? And at the end of paying off the specials for that particular lot, they're going to be paying property taxes for ad valorem property. It's better than having an empty lot and paying the specials out of the general fund. It's just not very successful doing that way. You can waive or abate specials, and like we did, we abated the specials, but we did that because the property tax will pay for the specials. Well, we've had, our specials were delinquent. We were paying for them. We didn't try to recover any of this lot. We wanted to get the property back in productive use. To us, it would have just been a really catastrophe trying to do that. We never would have sold the lots or been able to build a house. We've already talked about the negative and the positive associated with the land bank. We don't partner except with Habitat for Humanity. We partner with other housing entities for development of housing and a residential. On the economic side of the house for our industrial park and business areas, we partner with the Chamber of Commerce. And we actually have an agreement with the Chamber of Commerce that acts as a partner with our economic development, with our community development coordinator and the city manager. So it works very well, and that ties. And they advertise it for us. Have you ever heard of Location One? Location One is a state program that allows you to put business entities on that program, like our land bank commercial property, free. You can advertise statewide, and it actually goes on the international market as well. So if you've got industrial or commercial sites that you don't have to own them either, okay? But if you've got a land bank, you definitely want to use this program. So Location 1 is one you want to do. It is called Location 1, isn't it?
Yes.
I think there's one called Lois as well. It might be the same.
What's that?
Lois, Lois.
It may be. It's
Same
been a
thing.
while since I've got in it. I let my community development coordinator go wild with that kind of stuff. It says majority of property be acquired from the county after tax sale, emphasize on vacant lots. We try to do ours prior to that, deed restrictions. Land bank will encourage partnerships. Again, we do that with our Habitat for Humanity. We do not have a CHOTO in our county, but we've used the CHOTO at Housing Opportunities Incorporated to build our tax credits on one. And we've got an agreement with South Central Regional Economic Development District, and they're not a CHOTO, to be our grant administrator for the funds from Kansas Housing Resource Corporation to do our modern income, which we're building 8 homes right now. And that's for the tax credit. That program's only in effect for 2 more years. Population's supposed to be 20,000 or less. The state, this was a governor's incentive, Brownback's incentive. The state legislature, state senate says after this 2-year cycle, they'll never do it again. They don't like the idea of,
I was just going to interrupt you, too. They don't know what a CHOTO is. It's a housing program.
it's those that are certified to manage housing and using HUD money and federal money, and they go through a program to get that degree, if you want to look at it from that terminology. They can get those funds, and they can do the tax credits for the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation. You, as the entity, as a city, could not. You'd have to have them come in and do the program. And to be frank about it, you want them to manage the program. All you want to do is give them the lots and coordinate with that. So if you don't have a CHOTO right now that you're working with, my recommendation is find a CHOTO, look at your land bank, and try to work out some programs involved. I think you're working on some right now, correct, on tax credits we were talking about. On non-rebuildable lots, the land bank markets to adjacent property, we've done that, like I told you. We tore down the building. It was donated to us through the land bank. We demolished the building. It was $2,000, I think it was, no, $1,800 to demolish the building and level out the lot. And we sold the property for $500 to the next door neighbor to build a 3-car garage. Win, win, win. Because the property value on taxes was 0 before we took over that through the land bank. Now, we wouldn't have got to the land bank had we not done through our process of identifying structures that need to be repaired and demolished. So we sent out the notice of violation. We went through that process. So you got to do that, or these people out there will, if they get to keep that property forever, they're okay with that. Because they don't care at that point in time, does it affect the neighborhood around them, because 9 times out of 10, they don't live in that area. So you've got to manage that program of dilapidated structures and getting that into place. Here's your purpose. Return the tax delinquent property back to productive use. Pure and simple. So you can get the tax benefits and let the community use it as well. Don't do what, I'm going to tell you right now, I think Wyandotte County has got over their head. They don't have the staff to manage it. They're actually taking empty lots and turning them into neighborhood garden plots in residential areas. Now, that sounds really good, but who's managing that? Who's making sure that they're taking care of the lot? Well, when I drove through and looked at some of the lots, it looked like wheat harvest centers. Agriculture, you can't manage zoning, even if it's in industrial. If they want to plant wheat, they can plant wheat. This isn't wheat. It's just home growers out there, and they're not managing it very well. Most people who live in metropolitan don't know how to grow food. I hate to tell you that. And I'm one of them. I'm a retired Marine. I like onions because I put them in the ground. I don't have to do nothing. I just know they're going to get bigger. But the rest of those products, it becomes an issue for them. All right. We started out with this dilapidated hotel in our central business district. This property went through, what's that, not Purple Wave, but what's the one where you can buy stuff? eBay. This went through eBay 4 times, and this guy who ended up with the property bought it for investment for $22,000 out in Colorado. The roof had blown off. It was really a landmark. It's right in the middle of our square, 3-story structure. I went to council and I said, this is falling apart. You can't even go inside. It's so bad. So council said, well, let's get our land. I explained to the land bank, we got to go. We had that transferred at no cost from this gentleman out in Colorado. We got rid of all the taxes because they didn't pay taxes for 4 years. I mean, it was really bad. I was concerned it was going to fall in the other buildings. And we were building a brand new bank across the way. By the way, you really know when you're doing good is when your banking institutions tear down their old banks and build new banks. You know economically your community's doing well. We have 3 financial institutions, and guess what all 3 did? You darn right. They either modernized and upgraded their facility big time, or they built brand new. I call it the Taj Mahal across from City Hall. Man, I tell you what, I can't believe, that is the highest property tax of any building, to include all my industrial base, in the city, is that bank. To give you an idea. Anyway, this property, we ended up getting it, and council approved the demolishment. We ended up paying, I think it was like $18,000 to demolish the property, and we had $3,000 worth of asbestos we had to inspect and clean and get rid of because it's a commercial entity. And as a result of that, that lot is going to be used. They're going to put now we've had it for a couple of years. What they want to do is kind of like a mini park, and they're going to put in a building that sells coffee and donuts, and they're going to have a little harbor and all that type of stuff outside in the central business district right across from the county court. I think it's great news. So we'll be able to put that back. $100 for the lot. Here's what it looked like inside. Well, it was really good. We took all the refrigerators out. We asked the contractor when we did it to take all that stuff out, and we gave it to Habitat Humanity, and they fixed it and used it. I thought that was good. Here's a dilapidated structure we're working on right now, 621 West Avenue North. This building, back in 2012, we worked on. I got the city attorney trying to get a hold of the owner of the property to sell do the quick claim deed. The lady's 92 years old, won't even receive the mail. She won't talk to us. She lives in another state. So this came up for sheriff's sale. What we're trying to do with the county is have them transfer the ownership of the property to us through a quick claim deed. We want to demolish the property. It's got about almost 2 full acres on this. Beautiful area for development. The next door neighbors want to purchase some of the property, and we believe we can do the house and get it for Habitat for Humanity to build a new house into the area. Here's that school I was telling you about that tornado hit. The property was transferred to the land bank. We did demo the property for $5,300, excuse me, not 20-something. But again, it's adjacent to our park. We're looking at expanding our tennis courts and skateboard park in that area. Here's a house that was transferred to us. Again, this particular one we sold to the next door neighbor for the 3-car garage. Here's a dilapidated structure. The land bank, this is one of the properties this gentleman went to New Orleans on. We transferred to us in 2014. Both properties have been demolished. This one was for $2,000. CDBG paid 100% of that through Kansas Department of Commerce. And this one we're paying, and we just got the bids, is $4,000. There's actually two homes there. The homes were not serviceable or rehabitable, so we got rid of them through that process. Here's a house that had caught on fire, and the owner had a bill sent to him to remove the gas system because we own, as a public utility, the natural gas distribution system. The bill was about $250, $300. He just didn't want to pay it, so he donated it to the city. The landlord owns that property next to it. He's going to expand it, and he's going to get the property. He hasn't done it. He's going to pay $100 on the 21st of July for the property, and then what he's going to do is put a garage on that and tie the two properties together. So we put it back in effective use. Here's another property. Same thing. We got it down. A garage was built on this property with the adjacent property owner. This was a home HOI housing project. We purchased the property. We didn't have it donated to us. And then we had it transferred to our land bank committee, then as part of an economic development program, and we signed up with KHRC to build this through a tax credit program. So we built 6 homes in this area and 2 off Miles Street. We also brought in an assisted living facility, and they went on a neighborhood revitalization area for tax rebate. We're extending Miles Street out this year. I talked to the owner of the property, and he's going to build another duplex, kind of a complex next to it, and that's where Alzheimer's patients will go. We're also looking at expanding this and putting in some more infrastructure at the city's expense to bring some housing in. I have an idea. I told you it's my idea, and I want to try it out and see if it works through the land bank program. We're actually going to sell property, 3-bedroom homes, we think with a small basement, not a full basement, with 2-car garage for $75,000, 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom. We think we have a process in place. They're manufactured homes, which by law is the same thing as a stick builder, but we're going directly to the manufacturer to give that a shot. This was where the general contractor, we sold the property. He came in and was going to develop the property. And you can see the lots that we had. Here's the high school, and here's the what they call the Frisbee Education Center. We have a little park there. These lots and this area in here was sold to the developer for $20,000 to build. And the city put a $500,000 general obligation bond. We put water, sewer, gas. We had an electrical system put in through Midwest Energy. The streets, this was dirt. They were all surfaced in there. It was a $500,000 general obligation bond. And so we extended it out to 20 years because we were working with a general contractor because he had to pay the specials up front. One of the stipulations was he had to get insurance in the event that the LLC couldn't pay the specials, pay his taxes. He went to the bank, said he had it, took it off, never renewed it, and the bank never caught it, and we didn't either. So as a result, when we took him to court, he pleaded what? No contest. He didn't have it. The court ordered in favor of the municipality for him to pay all the specials back, but the LLC had how much money? Zero. So all we ended up doing was having the property transferred to us, relinquishing his debt, but he will never build in the city lines ever again, trust me. So anyway, so this property became now, we've built 3 houses, $300,000 homes in this area. It's a cul-de-sac into that particular area. We've built 1 home over here. Now we're using all these lots over here, part of that program. We're actually having a groundbreaking ceremony on the 8th of August. You're welcome to attend at 0900. We're hoping the governor will come. We're bringing KHRC. Fred Bentley and his crew will be down there as well. Then we also took all the other lots. We transferred them to the property, to the land bank, and for future housing development. These lots already had houses. These 2 houses had, there's a house here. This lot was purchased, but no houses have been developed on it yet. These are the program. This is the lot. We're going to go back on the, it was on the 16th of June, but on the 21st of July. This owner wants to purchase this property. Again, on a quitclaim deed, we'll have those restrictions. We actually asked the owner of this that wants to buy this property to come to the Land Bank Committee so they could hear specifically what's going to transpire on that. There's Wyandotte County, that land bank. They got 5,000 vacant lots, and when I got this presentation was about 2 years ago. They had 2,000, and they're using them right here for these garden plots. It's not a bad idea in concept, but in long term it didn't work out. Some of them they use them for housing, but for the most part, guess what? They're vacant lots and land bank have no process in place, nor do they have a staff to be able to do that. All right. They have sold 425 properties for $600,000. Here's the City of Lyons listing that we've got. And they, again, remember all these are already dedicated to a project. We've already got them allocated. We're working with some folks. Hopefully, anybody heard of JCAM? JCAM is a really big international company that formed out of a garage in Sterling. And right now it's sold to Canada for $285 million last year. But the corporation is still underneath this gentleman's name is Gene Zaid. And we're looking at where he's going to build $1 million hangar at our airport. We're getting ready to expand it next year, going from 3,000 to 4,400 linear feet with a grant from FAA. He's going to put $1 million hangar. He's got 3 jet aircraft. But anyway, he's involved. He's bringing in about 80 new scientists and programs, and what we're going to try to do is work an arrangement for building houses. What I want the city to do, because I don't think we're going to get any grant money to build the type of homes that need to be built in these areas, is that we'll waive the specials. We'll do all the free permits, and the city will give $20,000 to help build those $300,000 homes. Now, it sounds like it's an investment up front. That why are we doing that? It's the idea to get the homes built. Because the tax base, when you do up the property taxes, it'll pay for itself in 5 to 10 years. That's the incentive that we're looking at doing here. Okay. I put the League of Continuity of Disaster Plan Operations. The reason why I do this, anywhere I go, you got to ask help. You're doing it one of the keys. Ask people to get involved with this. I don't have all the answers for you, and I assure you some of the answers, or some of the things I talk about, you don't want to do. Some of the things you might want to expand and go a different route. But find out from different people how they process and do this, and have your staff work with them and our staff. Once you develop your program, I'll be glad to send my people up there and work with you. We do this around the state. We've been to Baxter Springs when their tornado hit. We went to Chapman. We went to Greensburg. We went to up at Harveyville. We went to Reading. In Chapman, I stayed there for a month and a half, off and on. I'm your representative, believe it or not, for cities, for the State Commission on Emergency Response and Planning, and the governor appointment for 4 years, so I represent you. So if there's something wrong, just tell me, because I'm normally the guy that did it anyway. But the point I'm trying to make to you, League of Kansas Municipalities, the City Clerks Association, there are a lot of people out there that do these programs like this, similar to it, that you can get their help with. You look on the website, you'll find ours, but you may not find it on them. But you got to ask the question, who out there does that? Don't be like this guy, okay? When you think everything's going well, and you think you got a plan, you look behind you, and it ain't going very well. And I think that's what's happened to you here. I mean, we were happy. We built 3 homes down there on this new grant, and then we found out this guy wasn't paying a penny on the specials. Then we found out he wasn't paying any property taxes either. Then we found out he was in arrears on other issues. And he was getting projects in the city and the county, $200,000, $300,000 projects, but not paying anything. We were not very happy with that guy. Or landing where the alligators are. I'm going to tell you, this has happened, right? It's happened probably to you. It happens to me, but it seems like every other day for some reason. But you take it with a grain of salt or a 5-pound bag, you learn from it, and you move forward, you find a way around it, but you don't let it kill you, all right? And communities never respond to those that are naysayers or the cave people. And you all know what cave people are, right? Citizens Against Virtually Everything. Everywhere I've been in my life, there's always been somebody that's a naysayer. You form the direction you want to go with the information you got, and make some decisions and move forward. I think you'll do okay. You've got some issues, I guarantee you. I've heard some of them, but you can make them work. That ends my show. Now, I'm going to tell you, we tie into Brownsfields. Every neighborhood revitalization, every land bank area we get, we do a Brownsfield. Why do I do a Brownsfield? I want to make sure environmentally that property is clean. What does it cost the City of Lyons to do a Brownsfield? It's a $30,000 fee to do a Phase 1. What's it cost your city to do that? The answer is zero. I preach Brownsfields. We've done an assisted living facility. We've done a housing development. I'm building a brand new city hall library complex. We did the Brownsfields and identified that maybe it required a Phase 2, and it did require a Phase 2. A Phase 2 means they've identified that there may be some contaminants. We go Phase 2. Our agreement with our bank who owned the property was, if it don't pay Phase 2, here's your property back.
Mr. Sweet, I have or Colonel, sorry about that.
Oh, no, John.
John, since you sound pretty positive, pretty happy about this, has all this been happening since you've been into the land bank, or this was going on, the land bank's just a little icing on the cake?
All these programs tied when the Brownsfield program has been there for a long time.
Yeah.
And what's the name of that program again, Brownsville?
Brownsfield. It's through KDHE up in, there's only 2 people that manage it. In fact, there's a Kansas Environmental Conference that takes place in August. I'm their speaker for lunch on the Brownsfields program. We use it, I'm just telling you, it has been very successful. It helped us be able to do our expansion on our airport. Without the Brownsfields program, we'd have never been able to do it. Now, there's other programs, like we took the dilapidated economic development. I found out this lady wanted to buy this dilapidated gas station, right? Wasn't in the land bank. So we went to the owner of the property. He sold it to the individual who wanted to build the accounting firm. I went to the KDHE and said, the city doesn't own the property, but we're working on an economic development incentive to get this property done. Can I do a Brownsfield? The answer was yes. We'll do the Brownsfield because the city's doing this with this property. So they came and did a Phase 1. Because of an old gas station, Abenaki went Phase 2. That's a $50,000 price tag, free to that owner and to the developer. We found out what the problem was. There were 3 gas tanks in the ground. So we told the owner, because of the economic development, we're going to go out and bid those removal of those tanks. So, but you pay for the, we'll pay for the removal of the tanks, and we'll pay for the Petroleum Trust Fund, which is about a $5,000 fee for you to build that property. Plus, we're going to give you a neighborhood revitalization area. So we ended up paying $2,000 to remove 3 $5,000 gallon tank. I'm telling you, when I go out for bids for demolition, I go out to everybody, or removal of that. So I looked on the state website, KDHE, all the areas. The people that removed it were out of Abilene, Kansas, came down and moved out of Lyons, Kansas. Then we did the demolition process. She had to pay for the demo. It was $2,500. The asbestos cleanup was a total of $300. It was a couple pieces of items in there. So we ended up with this clean property with Brownsfield. And because of Petroleum Trust Program, there's no other cost associated for environmental contamination ever. And they put the water survey monitors in there. The bank bought the property, and the KDHE will monitor it for the rest of its life. Nobody has to worry about environmental at that point in time. So that's what's significant. What you don't want to do is ever sell a property or build a government facility on a piece of property, then find out it used to be an old silo area, right? Because silo areas are contamination, trust me. Because you didn't clean it, you may have to go back and do what? Remove the structure and then clean up the property afterwards. So the Brownsfield for municipality is free. We wouldn't have been able to build our airfield had it not been for the Brownsfield program. This guy was an aerial sprayer, and he had an airplane, he had all kinds of contaminants on the ground, all kinds of contaminants. So the FAA would not allow us to do the acquisition of the property and move forward until we got a certificate of clean property. The owner, because I got a grandfather clause, didn't want to pay anything, so it was a catch-22. So what I did was I got the state to come in through Brownsfield to do the phase 1 and phase 2. We paid for the removal of tankers, which was $500. We went into the Petroleum Trust Fund as well as the VOL program, which is another contaminant, which would pay up to $25,000 to $50,000 local money. We don't have to pay anything, but local money from the state to do the cleanup. Because it was an orphan site, we didn't have to pay for any of that. All right? So, but you got to do the program. So the city managed it, but the owner had to sign off on the documents. So we got the owner to sign off on that, and I got a certificate from KDHE that says, we will take care of clearing this property, therefore we can say the property's clean. So I went back to FAA, and FAA says, now you can finish your acquisition, even though the property's not clean. It took us 4 years, but we got it done. We're now in our final design phase this year with a grant from FAA. We're building that airfield. That's an economic development tool. You can do the same for residential. We got an assisted living hotel, 40-room hotel built through a development, economic development. We bought the old gas station, did the same thing. We did a marketing study with a firm out of Wisconsin. They came down and showed what the potential was. This investment group came out of Topeka, I believe it was, or Kansas City, came down. We sold the property to them at no cost. Did a neighborhood revitalization area for 10 years, and they built that. Boy, that's been godsend since then. We bring in tourist groups, conferences. You can't believe some of the things we bring in. But Brownsfield was a success story that was behind on that program, and the land bank brought it into play.
It's grant monies for cleaning up properties that are contaminated.
Yeah, it's not specific to land bank stuff.
No, it's
No, but
it's
you
just
tie it in
addition-
together.
It just ties,
It's just
what he's
separate.
talking about is tying things together.
Municipality.
Neighborhood
programs together.
revitalization, tax abatement, Brownsfield's programs,
Junction.
other incentives that you can give, waiver of permit fees. Tie that into your land bank program to maximize the benefits, because what you want to do is get that property back into use. We had an old foundry that was dilapidated, same thing was going through the process. If I talk too long?
Yeah, I think Dave has a presentation, and we've only
Okay.
got till
Well,
7:30.
anything,
This isn't a
And
public hearing.
this isn't a public meeting.
Public hearing.
you can
Public
talk to me
hearing.
afterwards. Mr. Mayor, and anything else I can do to help you?
Thank you very much.
I'll leave my cards up here if you ever want to give me a call, or if there's any issues, we know that, so please don't hesitate. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think you got from John what they've done in lines, and the point that I think he made there at the end was that the other tools available are what you use to make sure that the property that you do have, if you put property in the land bank, particularly if it's distressed beyond just some of the stuff that we're talking about, but if we get into redevelopment in some of the older parts of town, if it ever reached that point, you want a clean bill of sale when you pass it, and you don't want that little dark cloud hanging over it. And the Brownsfield program is available to as a tool to use in addressing what might need to be done on a particular piece of property before you offer it for sale. It makes it very clear that it's clean and it's something that's available. I'm going to put the map up on the wall. As you all know from looking at the
With an S on the end.
map that I made available to you at the last meeting, I presume you've had a chance to take a look at some of that stuff. There's essentially two bodies of property scattered around the county, around the city, that went through the tax sale process. The stuff highlighted in blue went through the sale in 2013. And the stuff in yellow is what went this past tax sale that happened end of April, 1st of May, somewhere along in there. I had a conversation with Lloyd Graham I don't know the full extent that you've gotten into the discussion that's occurred recently, but one of the properties that Larry Johnson and his family bought up in the Doc Hargraves edition, which is up in this area, they had bought in 2013 and built a house on it, went through the process to sell it, and the title company at the last minute told them, no, there is a 1-year window of time that it's got to pass through before they'll issue title insurance on it. Well, they didn't find that out till about 2 or 3 days before the closing, and needless to say, there was a little bit of a panic going on. There is nothing in, and Katie knows this better than I do, but there's nothing in the statute that talks about this 1-year period. It's coming from the title insurance companies.
Well, no.
Okay.
The statutes, the statutes that govern tax foreclosure sales say that for a period of 1 year after the confirmation of the sale, which is done by a judge, because it's done through a court process, there's a period at which the sale itself could be challenged by somebody. So it might be challenged, for example, by the property owner. They might say you didn't give everybody who's required to be given notice of the sale. Tax sale like any, tax foreclosure sale like any foreclosure sale, mortgage foreclosure sales, there's a specific statutory process that has to be followed in order for the encumbrances, in this case taxes, to have been released and for the property to be sold. And if those processes aren't followed, it's possible that a tax sale could be overturned. But since there's a 1-year statute of limitations, if nobody filed an action to set aside the tax sale during that 1-year period, then nobody ever can. So that's the reason title insurance companies won't insure properties that are purchased at tax sales, because at any time during that 1-year period, someone could file suit and the tax sale could be undone. So they just simply won't insure properties because of that 1-year statute of limitations for challenging the tax sale.
And the magic date is the date of confirmation, and that's the term that Lloyd Graham used, which is essentially the decree signed by the judge that says it's gone through the process.
It's gone through the process.
And it's officially done. With respect to all those that are highlighted in blue and yellow, these are properties that were put up for tax sale in the last 2, one in the blue in 2013, the yellow this past spring. And those were ones that there were no bidders at the tax sale. What Lloyd has indicated is that effectively the no bidders, it's now statutorily, as he said, in the name of the county, even though of record it still shows the original property owner, and the county's got certain abilities to dispose of that. The dates that he gave me for these properties in blue were September 12th and September 25th of last year. So that 1-year statute of limitations time will expire this coming September on those properties. The ones in yellow that are scattered all over a lot of Mann's Ranch, or I'm sorry, not Mann's Ranch, Sutter Woods, Sutter Highlands, Patriot Point, the JCTD properties, or the Deer Creek additions down at the south end. Those were on this last tax sale. Nobody bid on those for the most part, and he said the confirmation on that happened the end of June, so we're looking almost a full year before that 1 year would expire on that. As pointed out by, and we included in the packet that you got, the little policy book that the City of Lyons put together with respect to property that they have in their community. We've got the same information from the City of Hutchinson. We've got the same information from the Unified Government or Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County. Essentially, that's the kind of stuff that if you move forward, needs to be done here. We need to have some policy decisions, some very definitive things that are going to need to be addressed, including the thing that I've made a note of it as he went through and talked about it, was if you offer for sale a lot, say this land bet takes property and offers it for sale, we want to put in, and we'd be, staff would be encouraging you to put in certain performance requirements on whoever acquires that if you take the lot under whatever condition that it is, there's a requirement that within so much time you've got to take a building permit out. Within a certain period of time, you've got to have a home completed or whatever the improvement is. You've got to hook it up to the city utilities. There's also a longer-term performance that you can't go delinquent on future taxes. And if you do, maybe you then, if the policy is that you waive or modify the outstanding specials, that if they ever go delinquent again, then that's all due and payable. I mean, there's any number of ways that you can draw this up. It's a question of deciding, do we move forward? What do we do with this? As you're aware, because I've talked about this in the past, we have the open house Thursday on our comprehensive plan. Within that pantheon of work that's going on, the consultants have actually gone into some of these subdivisions and laid out some concepts of how some of that might be redesigned or restructured or managed to be released in phases over time to encourage development to happen. The concept being it's easier to sell a lot adjacent to an existing home so that people have neighbors and feel like they're not out there by themselves, as opposed to just picking a lot off here and a lot off there, which is the other side of what happens if this continues to just float in the tax sale. Or, as it is now, I think after 6 months, the county can then just go through and offer these for sale and put them up for bid or whatever they want to do with it.
They can do that anyway. They can sell properties that don't sell at the tax sale.
So part of it is a question of that you as the Board of Trustees / governing body will have to ultimately come up with is, what do you take, if any at all? What do you do with it? If we take them, say for the sake of discussion, you decided to take them all, do we then go into some of those other areas and look at possibly some redesign or some remodification, maybe some rezoning to out of single family to some other kinds of uses that may be more marketable in the community right now? So there's any number of things that can happen. None of it occurs until the land bank has the asset under its control. So the step one really needs to be decided, and I would presume, and I don't know, but I'm just thinking out loud here, presume that there's kind of a dual track thing that's going on. One is, does you as the land bank wish to take control of the asset? That is, the city, you're making the payments on the specials anyway. So do you take the control of the asset and at least get it into your control to where you're able then, on behalf of the community, to look at what you might do with it, and then simultaneously start developing policies and guidelines and some structure of how you're going to run the program and what you're going to do with it, and realizing that it's all going to be a phased operation. One of the things that I found out today in talking with Lloyd Graham was that since the one-year statute of limitations, for lack of a better term, expires in September, some of this property would be in a position, if the land bank acquired it, through gifts from the county, hopefully, that in a very short order of time, we'd have some lots that could be made available, that could be made for sale, that hopefully would then start generating some revenue back to cover some of the carrying costs you've got for the property. As Cheryl has mentioned many times, there will be some costs to deal with maintenance issues on the property, mowing or weed control or some other issues of that nature. All that's got to be worked out on what you're going to do with that stuff. But for the most part, it's with the full understanding that once you move it into the land bank, the property goes off the tax rolls. It's no longer subject to ad valorem taxes annually as long as it's in the name of the land bank. The specials are just frozen with respect to the future levy. The bond payments still have to be made, but the outstanding specials, say for the sake of discussion, there's 15 years of outstanding specials on that. That freezes. That's that body or that block of money that instead of requiring to be annually levied for tax purposes every year, it's just frozen. And then when the land sells to somebody else that is part of that sale, you guys, as the Board of Trustees ultimately, or the City Commission, decide, what do we do with those outstanding specials? Do we leave them on the property and say, nope, now that payment schedule starts all over again and we'll just recoup it? Do you write that down to a percentage of that outstanding? Do you waive the whole thing? What do you sell the lots for? I mean, there's just any number of things that's limited only by your own imagination of what you can do, but nothing can be done until you get control of the asset. But that's
And
part of the policy
I
stuff.
think
that-
something really important to point out here about the specials is that under Kansas law, the only mechanism for forgiving the special assessments,
Is
once
the
they're
land.
levied, is through the land bank.
Yep.
There is no other legal way. If that turns out to be the best way to get this property back on the tax rolls, under Kansas law, there is no other legal way that you can abate the specials. So it's a hugely powerful tool.
Even if you just discount 25% of them to bring
Yeah.
them down to a more
To
reasonable.
get the property back on the
Correct.
tax rolls and, get 50% of what you're owed instead of, 0%. It's the only legal mechanism that is available.
And to change the plat on the property if that was the choice,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
But I mean, again, without that, you can't legally forgive them. There's no mechanism.
For example, the Olivia Farms has those really tiny lots
Right.
that probably if you
That's my point.
took the land bank, you'd want to redo it
Yeah,
and
but you
replat
can
it.
replat, as
You
long
can
as you,
replat it.
you can replat it, you can rezone it.
I had a question on the Olivia Farms.
Mhm.
Everything in blue is vacant?
Yes. And it was also made available for sale at the 2013 tax
2013.
sale. Now, the red stuff actually sold at the tax sale.
Okay.
The little red dots, those are properties that actually were sold. Don't know the amount, but they sold. But all that blue stuff was put up as for sale at the tax sale in 2013. There were no bidders, no takers, and right now it's just sitting there.
So if it, for instance, everything in blue sometime in September, the year is up, it could go into the land bank, could it be sold to a single housing development company for the sole purpose of building housing for only military?
Well,
Would we have to
other than
set-
the question of only military, the answer, in my opinion, would be yes, all the way through. It can be sold individually by lot, or you can sell the whole thing as a unit. You can break it up into units. You can sell it to individuals, you can sell it to developers, all those kind of things. I don't know that you have the ability to mandate that they both build only for military. I don't know that that's a legal thing that can
Don't
be
either.
done.
But, I mean, one thing some communities do, I've just looked in general around the country, there's a lot of stuff about land banks on the internet, is they'll go out for RFP. They'll acquire the large parcel, and then they'll decide, okay, we want this developed for residential, for example, or multifamily or whatever. Then they'll go out for RFP and ask developers to make a proposal.
Well, the reason why I ask is about three and a half years ago, John Pacern from New England wanted to buy that particular
Development.
development, but there was problems with having to hold it for a year to be able to get title, and there was problems with that, and they couldn't get to the answer yes.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing is after September, it's...
Well, and the land bank
open.
does not have to wait till September to take possession of the property. They can do that theoretically tomorrow.
Okay.
But the ability to pass clear title through a
Clear
title insurance
title
company is
September
September
25th.
12th or 25th. Yeah.
Okay, good information.
And I don't know, but I think it's about, and Katie, you help me, but I don't think under any of the federal housing laws, we've got the ability to mandate who the buyers can be, i.e. military or former military. We can't do that.
And
Now,
what-
if we sell it to a developer and then they put that on as private restrictions, that's their
That was
call.
my question.
We're
Yeah,
not-
I don't know. That I
Then they
don't.
can't, if that's the case, it's not on a federal installation, they still have to pay property taxes on it.
Yes.
Right, yes.
They call the program lease housing. And that way the government owns it, but it's strictly leased by the government for military personnel only.
That's
Well,
802. That's 802 program. I'm talking about a private developer
Right.
doing this, as opposed
Well,
to the Army doing it,
any-
which is the 802 program.
Any use the city would agree to would have to be a use that would be subject to taxes, because you wouldn't have any
Right.
reason
Yes.
otherwise. I mean,
Want to make sure
you
that was
wouldn't want to
clear.
be
Yes.
having a
There's other
church,
incentives.
no, a church, because, you know.
Because that
property's
question was
exempt
asked
from-
me by
Yeah,
the formal garrison commander about
Right.
that before.
But there's other
Not property
incentives
taxes, so.
that they're talking about. Just one example of what could possibly be done, and I just wanted to hear those answers.
You said, not, for example, for churches because they're tax exempt and that's not the purpose that you want to do. However, for instance, we know that we need down the road another fire station location up in the northern part area of town, and so you could set aside 1 or 2 lots, whatever the size you thought the fire station would be, for that purpose.
Or a grade school or whatever.
Or,
Correct.
yeah,
Or
Yes.
park.
yeah.
a public purpose.
A public
A
purpose.
public purpose.
But
Public
not a
Yeah.
private
But, yeah,
501c3 purpose where,
Where you're
or
not
even
gonna
a
get
a post office doesn't pay property taxes.
right.
Yeah, you heard
For your
John talk
own-
about,
For your own public purposes, the city
Yeah,
public purposes.
or, you
Yes.
know,
or for a school
another
district.
government, unless you want to benefit another government entity.
Yeah.
You probably don't want
But you heard John talk about,
to, but,
they tore down that one old school that finally had just, but it was adjacent to the city park, and they're expanding their park into it, so.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say we set up this agreement, we have stipulations in there, you'll pull a permit, you'll build a house, whatever, and that doesn't happen. Do they have 3 years?
well, that,
Like
that
it is in the
would
state?
be, that would be up to you. You can decide.
That's up to you.
And you can decide it, I think there would be 2 policy levels. One would be just sort of the general one, to kind of, what are you trying to encourage here? It can be broad.
Yeah.
And then the second one would be on a per-property basis. You would decide what bells and whistles do you want to put on there. And
So-
then the concept would be that the property would revert back to the land bank if they didn't meet their
There would be
obligation.
an actual drop-dead date, and we
Yes.
wouldn't have to be in limbo for a year or 3 years before we reassumed
If
title.
they didn't live up to the obligation, then we would enforce the contract.
Well,
Come back into the land bank.
Right.
You've got putting performance standards as a covenant that gets recorded with the deed that basically says, you're
Right,
buying this
either-
property with the understanding, here's the certain performance requirements you have
the
to do,
only-
and failure to do that's going to revert this property back to the land bank, and any money exchanged is
Or you
and-
put up
and
a
what-
bond or something like
well,
that.
yeah, now the only problem I see with that approach, and I'd really like to talk to some cities that have done this. If you were, for example, going to take Olivia Farms and go out for RFP and try to get one developer to finish it up, or, build multifamily or whatever, and then, but we put those restrictions in the deed, those conditions pursuant to which the property theoretically could revert back to the city, I don't see them getting financing to do that very easily, because a lender who's going to loan them the money to do that isn't going to want to risk that they will lose the property.
Well, even if you did an RFP for something like that, you could still phase it. You'll do the front.
Well,
Yeah.
Or so
No,
on.
I know. But I'm just saying, I see problems with commercial lenders coming in and saying, I don't want to take a mortgage on a piece of property that might revert back to the land bank. That's not worth anything to me. It's not good credit. So I'm sure that's been done, and we just have to figure out how it's been done and how
Yeah.
it's worked. Because practical purpose, most people are going to borrow the money
Right.
to build on these houses. And most lenders are going to say, a mortgage that gives me a security interest in a piece of property that might go back to the land bank doesn't
Yeah.
make me feel very secure.
There's other
So we've
states
got
that
to
have a
figure
lot,
out how that works, because there's got to be a way to...
other states have got a lot longer history with
Yeah.
land bank processes, and there's
Yeah, that's a good point.
And
lessons that can be learned from there that we
Yes.
just,
Yeah. Because if a lender simply says that you have to, as a city, subordinate your right of reverter to us, which means if the property owner doesn't do what we said they have to do, the lender forecloses, and the lender can foreclose out our interest, then we haven't really gotten very far down the road. But it may be a risk you have to take in order to make some of those work.
And I also thought John's presentation was beneficial. Yes, we've got all of the tax sale lots in the subdivisions, but they're using it to deal with dilapidated and endangered structures in the town, that particularly when you're dealing with absentee owners or property in the state that's got messy title on it. And
We deal with a lot.
yeah.
And you have to remember, though, we only have $15,000 in our budget for demolition.
Right.
And the reason I had brought this up at the beginning of our budget process is because if we're going to be doing this, we need to budget for land bank, and I don't have it in the budget right now, but we're getting close within the next 2 weeks. I need a decision. Are we doing land bank and how much? Because we're going to have money to finance this, to take care of these lots and advertise and manage it and mow the weeds and spray the weeds and,
We would go into that very slowly
yeah.
and very pinpoint accuracy as to what we thought was best for the land bank. And we're not talking about hundreds of demolishing properties.
Right.
No.
So once we learned from that, and as that ball began to roll, that may be a tool a year from now or 2 years from now that we want to look at, and there are properties that are lined up, ready for the queue to be able to go into this, and we'll be
But the
better prepared.
We're in the situation right now where the county is waiting for us to say, do you want all of this or some of it? Because if you don't take all of it, then they're going to put it up for sale. And do you want them to put it up for sale and arbitrarily sell a lot here, a lot there, a lot, and just any old place? Or do you want to put it into the land bank and control it? If you put it in the land bank and control it, then we have to manage it, and that takes money. They're going to have to manage it too, one or the other. But the point of this, to ask you guys tonight, is we need to know fairly quickly, are we going to do this or not do this, and how much? And if you don't think we can't resolve it tonight, but if you want to start having a series of subcommittee meetings,
Well, I think
or a series of meetings to get these policy decisions decided, because either the county's going to sell this off, or we're going to control it and sell it off.
Well, the county can't sell it off now. It's proven for the last 2 years it didn't sell, so
But they
I don't
can,
think
But they
that's
could just
that
offer it
critical.
to sell, and
No,
somebody
they-
could walk in and just buy one.
yeah, the onesie, twosie type.
Yeah.
but
But I don't think that's
but they
as
could-
critical.
They could sell it tomorrow, anytime. They're just
Mm-hmm.
simply waiting. They put it up for tax sale once, and they're waiting for us to make a decision. If we don't make a decision on this, then they're going to put it up for sale, is what it boils down to.
I think,
And
go ahead.
I don't think we need to get too excited about that, because whatever we put in the land bank, we'll have the right to take away part of the specials or a portion of the specials, and the county will not have that right.
No, that's why we're asking you.
And,
Get it.
and I don't think I don't feel the pressure to take it all in, because I think if we take 100 lots, that's probably going to be about as much.
I disagree with that. I think you need to get control of the properties that you have. I don't think we need to mow them every week or every month. But if we have control of all the properties, we can decide what happens with them now. I mean, if somebody comes along and just starts buying piecemeal here and there, it kind of fouls up any plans of what we might want to have with that area. So I think you take it now. You take as many as you can now.
I mean, the ones that you've already got them all blocked off. The great big sections of them where there's no houses built. It's already all blocked off. We're not mowing them. We're not doing anything with them anyway. But if the county starts selling those off, and even if one house sells back on a street that's blocked off, then we've got to open that street
That's a problem.
and start maintaining it. So that's my concern is we've got to start making decisions very soon here about what we're doing, because it affects our budget, and we need to know because the county's waiting. They're waiting for us to make a decision. They've been waiting for a year now for us to make a decision.
I think there's an opportunity here to even create a housing boom, if you will. those specials drop down quite a bit. There may be people already living in this town might say, you know what? I'm gonna move out there. No specials? Trade off what I have right now and go over there.
There's aspects that need to be talked through with that too, because you've got properties that have already been built
Exactly, they're
or
already
that are
zapped with those
carrying
specials.
specials, and so there's an equity question that's going to come out in the dialogue of, well, is it fair? Well,
Lower your
the
monthly payment $300-400.
flip side of it is
Like
hey,
going to a different house in the same block,
life's never been fair.
like it or not.
My concern is about the county selling, someone comes in, I don't remember all the names of the streets, but a street that has, it's all blocked off now, it's in limbo, but if the county sells off, a person comes in and says, yeah, I hear these properties are all for sale, the county says, yeah, they are. And they say, well, I like the one at the end of there, it's back and quiet down in there, and I like that lot, I want to buy that one. Is it for sale? The county says, yes. They buy it. Guess what? We now have to open the street. We have to maintain that street.
What do you think the budget would need to be?
Initially, I
Administer
can't
this.
see that it's going to be some advertising money and some mowing money, $10,000-$20,000. I mean, that's just a guess, but
But in theory, after, and that's with the assumption that there's zero revenue, but in theory, come October 1, there could be a lot or two sold that would generate some revenue too.
But we could look at the engineering budget and see what they have in there for doing just the 8-foot mowing.
what are we mowing a year on the 8-foot? Greg? I don't, the total, that's on all of those lots right now, you're already paying for it.
Right. Right now on that 8-foot strip, we mow roughly about 20 miles of vacant street. And it's in, I guess I want to say it chunks, but we have a very low price right now. We're in the third year of our contract. We've already negotiated a couple of smaller pieces to add into that program. So I wouldn't want to venture to say that that's a good number to use, but I believe on the vacant streets right now for just one mowing, I believe we're paying as far as roughly around $6,000 to $8,000 as far as for one cut, as far as along those areas. And we typically try to get 2 to 3 cuts a year.
That's already in the budget.
That's already in the budget, and that's a
Talking about
very
another
low.
10 to 20 on
That's
top
a
of
very
that.
low number, and all we mow is 8 foot from the back of curb
Shouldn't
towards
be
the
any different than what
lot,
we're doing now.
right? And then we mow the,
No, I'm talking about if you wanted to advertise or develop anything.
Oh.
You're going to have some money to be able to develop these properties.
and then we mow the 25-foot corner clearance. And basically, we're just trying to preserve the street, the integrity, so we don't get the encroachment on small trees and seedlings getting into and encroaching on the street area.
And then codes on the other areas that's where there's some houses built on infill lots, they mow the whole lots on those, don't they?
Yes.
Yes. Mhm.
You'd have some cost too for, not rezoning, but replatting.
Replatting.
right?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to, the reason I
cost there
say
as
to increase the budget in 10 to 20,000 ranges, because you're going to need some money to talk about replatting or advertising.
You might, and you
or
might have to do some title searches,
yeah,
things like that.
things like that. You're
It's a
going to
great-
have
It's a
some
great
money.
investment,
Yeah.
because we're getting nothing right now.
Right.
Nothing. It's a
Right.
lead anchor that's pulling the city down.
So that's
But
all,
the
that's
key
all I was
is-
been saying, so you're talking whatever the budget is now and that plus another 20,000, is that,
You're going to have some money, yeah.
I understand it, but that's, I'm trying to, you guys are
Just to come
confusing
up
me in the sense of,
Out of Hyde. Require it to be the same and take it out of Hyde.
that's not my point. My point is, what dollar amount, because we keep talking, I mean, one hand we're talking, are you talking 100,000 or 10,000? I'm hearing you saying whatever the budget is plus another 20 should take care of.
I think so.
Okay, that's what I was trying to
That's what
find.
I'm saying, is because you guys talk about doing it steps at a time, and I think you need to do baby steps with this, baby steps for getting launched. Then you're going to need to start addressing it aggressively to get these back on the tax roll.
Well, Mr. Landis makes a very good point, and I like the idea of Sutter Woods. That's like a big chunk, and it's kind of a development by its own, as well as the Deer Creek.
Deer Creek is down south here.
But those ones are a year off. Right.
Those are a year
Those are
off.
a year
The
off.
others are just a few months off.
Olivia Farms and the north end of Sutter Highlands, I think, is
September.
the blue areas, where you can see there was some lots already sold.
Those are already available without the year wait.
Right. They're available in
And then the yellow lots are available next June.
Roughly.
Ish.
Yeah. In terms of the.
So next
clear
year's
title.
budget
Well, they're
cycle,
available now. You could
Yeah.
transfer
But
them
that-
now.
next year's budget cycle, they would be able to be
Yeah.
sold whatever by June.
I'd say
July.
start small. Start
Extremely
with
small.
the
Well, then we
blue
would know.
ones and see how
How that
goes. Since you couldn't effectively do anything with the yellow lots for a year, why take them now?
Nobody's gonna buy those anyway.
Yeah, because they can't
as they
get
are
title
now.
insurance.
I still have a concern about that, but, I mean, you could take them,
You could take them and
because
park
we're
them.
paying to mow them anyway.
And
Then
what's
you,
the
then you have
difference?
control of it, then it's done.
That's what I'm saying. What's the difference?
Right.
Then you know it's in your control,
We're out the same amount of money right now as it is.
because the county could still sell them. They probably wouldn't, but
And part of the negotiations I think you ought to have with the county would be the fact that if you move, even if you took virtually everything and moved into the land bank now, you're also then forestalling any future expenses the county's going to have to try to dispose of that property. That's the cost that they have to carry in their budget. That's tax money.
Title searches
Yeah,
and all that stuff.
so that's stuff that needs to be understood as well. And it's not, you're not acting in a vacuum here. There's other taxing entities that are impacted by this.
the whole purpose of the land bank is to get your control over properties that are going to be developed under your say-so, rather than allowing somebody else to control what your city's going to do.
One of the things that Mr. Sweat,
Sweet. John Sweet.
Sweet. One of the things he mentioned is this is very costly. He says they have a staff of 2 people and they do about 8 to 10 properties. If we're looking at that entire area in blue, even a portion of it, the stuff that's north of Rucker Road, that's a good bit of land to manage. And he said 2 for 8. That's about 50 to 80 properties right there. Who's going to do the work for that?
Well, he's talking about it takes time to, these are 300 or 400
Yeah.
properties.
They're-
The only time consuming he's talking about, as far as time consuming, is the setup time, and that's to get, which we're already doing right now just for our own properties that we own already, is to get a file folder on each property with the deed, the aerial, and any issues that have to deal with that property. We're doing that right now. Yes, that's going to be time consuming. But what we would do is prioritize and then say, okay, like you had mentioned, all the blue area up, take that. Well, let's concentrate on that area first. That's the area we'll concentrate on for development. The rest, unless somebody comes to interested in it, we're just going to leave those, and we'll get the priority and start knocking them down as we go.
And the county went through, according to what Mr. Graham told me, they did full research and got title searches on all these
And
properties. And
presumably
he's got individual.
They would share
they
it.
would share that
And
with us.
if you took possession of it in the land bank, all that data would come with it.
Right, yeah.
So we don't have to
So there,
duplicate what's already been done. And just so you know, according to what Mr. Graham said, this last tax sale, they generated $200 in sales. It cost the county $80,000 to go through the tax sale by the time they took care of everything they had to do.
The one in May or?
Yes, April or May.
But in roughly 4 or 5 years, property taxes will bring that right back.
Pardon me?
Roughly in about 5 years, those property taxes should come back for what the county put into it. If they spend about $80,000,
if we get them back on the tax roll.
If it gets
Once
back.
it goes on the tax rolls, then
Yeah.
we're no longer abating taxes and it's generating tax revenue. And then there's some
You get a house on there, you're golden.
that's pretty much what I'm saying. I'm just trying to make the obvious out there. I'm not
Yeah.
playing out there as a dummy. I'm just
The
trying to put
difficulty, and
Exactly.
there's some stuff I pulled up that refers to these as distressed or zombie subdivisions and all kinds of things of that nature. Other states have dealt with this, of what do you do with projects that were laid out, all the infrastructure's in, and it's a toxic asset. Nobody wants to touch it because of various and sundry issues involved, including questions on clear title and the outstanding specials and the unknown of so many other things. As Katie said, the only tool available to you under the law to manage this stuff is through the land bank. What you do with it is pretty wide and varied, and we can be as creative as we want to be and explore everything that's involved. But until you have control of the asset, nothing really can go forward very much. There's costs, and that's what Cheryl's concerned with, and I know.
He talked about Wynett County, and they have 6,000 properties that they manage, and they have a staff of 2 people at Wynett County. Because when Jerry Vernon and I first started exploring this, I called and talked to the Wynett County person extensively, and their main purpose really is to take care of, their land bank the main purpose was to take care of their old part of town and their empty lots and dilapidated buildings. And so that was their main focus. It wasn't a situation like this. It was just to take care of that. And yeah, it was very time-consuming for those 2 people, and they were trying to sell them, but nobody was interested in buying them at all because they were in the old part of town. And so that's why they ended up with garden space and things like that they were given to community gardens. And so theirs is a whole different situation. And yeah, they had 6,000 lots and only 2 people were managing it. Where this is going to end up will end up back in my lap as the property manager / financial.
To a great degree, I think, don't get past the number of lots here. You're really talking only about 8 or 10 properties. Essentially, it's whole subdivisions. And the question becomes, okay, if we carve off and say the north end of Sutter Highlands or parts of Olivia Farms, those are the ones we're going to offer for sale now. We'll set the parameters for that. With the other properties, we're maintaining the infrastructure in there now with the mowing program and the weed issues. That's already being covered. So it's really not an added expense. It's more a matter of what do you want to invest in trying to conceptualize how that might be reused and what other markets might be out there. And the discussions in-house have been things of even, go into the school districts and say, hey, we'll carve off some lots here and
If you'll build
make them available, but you got to build a school.
And I think one thing we're kind of missing too here, I think this is a big economic development tool in
absolutely.
attracting business to come here. If you've got really low-cost housing areas, that's a big deal. Especially our neighbors that are getting this new bioscience center, they might be looking at another community that has lots pretty cheap
Well,
for people to house that are
and as
working
an
there.
economic development tool to have in your toolbox, being in a position to make available lots that someone can come in and build on right now.
Tracts of land.
Don't have to go through the wait to rezone and replat and put infrastructure. It's all there. And it puts the city, well, to use the analogy, in my opinion, it's the only mechanism we've got to make lemonade out of the lemons that we've got.
So the whole purpose and the reason we kept bringing this forward to you is because of the control issue. It's really about who's going to control the land so that you can take and make the lemonade out of the lemons, and you decide where it goes and who's going to buy it and how it's going to be, who's going to be sold to and for what purpose. It isn't done arbitrarily, and it just isn't willy-nilly, oh, I like this lot, oh, I like this lot. And you sell it in sections, you phase it in, you do all of those things is controlled by you then.
David, on the title searches that are already been done on the ones that have gone to tax sale, do those have to be repeated? I mean, it's already been
No.
done once?
No,
No.
no.
Okay.
It's
No,
ready.
because once you
All
take,
all the lots, that's been done with?
yes.
It's simply waiting for you guys to say yes, and the county said,
So that expense has already been paid. That's a
the
big deal.
county is already telling you, they're just waiting to transfer it to the land bank.
Boy,
Waiting for your decision.
There's not much to think about, I don't think here, but
That's all they're waiting for. And
I'm hearing a lot of pro of bringing it into the city, under the city's control through the land bank. What's the con?
the cost of development, of any development, there is
Well,
going to be
the
some
carrying
cost
costs
associated.
of managing the property. That's kind of somewhat of an unknown. But, the flip side of it is the fact, on behalf of the citizens and taxpayers of the city, you're making the payments on the
we're already
debt
paying it
now.
anyway.
Yes.
You've got no control of the asset. This would give you, doesn't relinquish the obligation to make the bond payments, but at least it gives you, on behalf of the citizens of the city and taxpayers, control of the asset to figure out what's in the best interest of the community to move forward.
Does it cost? Is there a cost to the community?
Beyond maintenance.
Other than what we're doing now? I mean, I know we're
Beyond
already
maintenance,
maintaining.
no, and then just,
Advertising.
there's going to be some cost, because if you're going to develop a property, if you're going to RFP it out, it's going to be, you've got to reach the right people and get to the right place.
There would be administrative costs
Yes.
in just managing the, the land bank itself.
Traditional staff
You
needed?
would incur
That's the question, I
possibly
think.
some engineering fees if you were going to
Yes.
replat the property.
Yeah.
Legal fees if we put together an RFP and contracts. and
Contracts,
deeds,
things of that nature.
If you
those
Normal
kinds of-
business
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's,
association.
yeah, we're not going to lie to you, it's not going to be free, but there's going to be some cost to developing the property.
That can go towards the cost of the property itself.
Right.
Even if you
Right.
did
Right.
whatever with the specials, this is the cost of the land, and this is what we put in for engineering and so on.
And there'll be upfront costs. Now, like you said, depending on if you give the land away for nothing, or if you ask for a nominal fee for the equity of the land, if it's 10,000 a lot or something, you can put that money back into, we can allocate a special fund
machine.
for it. I can get a fund set up for it, and then, but the general fund has to be able to pay for this initially. It's not going to be self-supporting, that's for sure.
And that's what the 20,000 additional is.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about, which is why I started at the beginning of this budget session. We need to start talking about the land bank, because I knew you guys were thinking of doing this, but you hadn't talked about finances for this. It's going to take some money to manage this.
And then the program you put in place, if you say the property's going to revert back at a certain date, you got to have people say, okay, yeah, it's reverted back, and do the legwork.
Well, yeah.
And then there's legal fees associated with
But
that.
there's, the upside is that, because I was concerned that the one-year redemption period would start from the day the land bank would take title. And Lloyd said, no, it's the day the court
The court
confirmed
agrees.
the action, which means we're, in a short period of time, going to have assets that would be available to generate some revenue. Right now, you don't.
Yep.
So although you cannot make a formal decision
Just to make
tonight,
you think about it.
or a formal
This is a
decision
work session, there's no
tonight, we
decision
still,
tonight.
tentatively, I would like to go ahead and put some money in the budget,
I'm going to
the
close
land
this.
bank program, because I'm getting close to finishing up the budgets. Instead of the $40,000 I had for grants, I can put money, and you were shaking your heads no, for grant match, we can use that for land banking.
Grant match for what?
I had put 40,000 down for grant match money, and a couple of you were shaking your heads no. Set aside monies for grant match. And at the time, I saw a couple of heads shaking no,
I mean, like for
but it could be used
police
for
equipment or whatever? Or
anything, grant match of any
Whatever
grant.
grant may come up, that was a buffer
It
that
was
was
a buffer.
built in there.
But you could, instead of that being for grant match, it could be for land bank, or split, 20/20, 20 for land bank, 20 for grant match.
Picking it out of height is the only way to go.
So,
Yes.
But we
We'll
can't
take a
make any
short break
decisions
before the next
no,
one.
but those are the things that before we wrap up the budget, I'm going to need a final direction.
And what I would suggest is that at some point, at one of your next meetings, you have created the organization. I mean, the statute is in place.
Right. It is.
You could sit and meet as a land bank, because we have the statute. You've just never convened a meeting.
Right.
True.
But you could convene, because really, if you're going to adopt policies and make a decision to take the property from the county, you have to be wearing your land bank hats.
Yep.
So you could, at one of your next meetings, you could convene early or after, whatever, but, you're going to be here anyway, and you could have a land bank meeting, and you could decide then what you want to do.
I think that's a good idea. We need to discuss it formally
Yeah.
Yep.
as the land bank.
And then,
Yeah.
and then any decisions you make it
Right.
as a land bank.
But it does give us a good idea and good thought to sit back and absorb and then research some more of this, and maybe even visit a little bit with Mr. Sweet, kind of pick his brain a little bit, or the staff that works this. I think in another month, we ought to be able to make.
You may desire to make a road trip down and talk to their governing body at a land bank meeting of what their feelings are, too. You heard from from John as the administrator, but talk to your peers. So,
Right.
Hutchinson's run ones too. I haven't talked to Hutchinson.
I talked with John Deerdorf, the
They
city
up and
manager
running?
down there, and theirs is up and operating from an organizational standpoint. We've got their policies, and now
they
they
don't
went to
have
the
any
point where they
land.
created committees and did a bunch of other stuff. They've
Oh, they
not
haven't-
taken possession of any property.
Oh, okay. So they're just started like we are.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We ran over. Do you want to take a break, 5-minute break?
Yes.
One of your additional goals is to keep Tyler away. Okay?
Haven't been sleeping well.
Yeah, throw water or something at him every once in a while.
PDES phase 20.
Rock and roll. You're on, Greg.
All right, Mayor and City Commission, we're here this evening to provide you an overview of the city's stormwater management master plan. We have a PowerPoint presentation that we've put together of several slides. What we're looking to do is provide you a project overview, a capital improvement as far as plan overview, some operation and maintenance issues, as well as concerns, cover as far as the city's stormwater regulatory requirements, programs that are related as far as to that particular plan. We're also going to get into as far as the financial aspect of the city's stormwater system. We'll cover as far as a little bit about rate structure, and ultimately as far as try to get into what we believe is the item that hopefully will drive the city's stormwater infrastructure system, and that's the financial business plan. There's a lot of items that we're not going to cover in detail this evening, and that is the field work, be it the inventory, the modeling, a lot of the GIS or asset management material that ultimately will be turned over to the city for staff, both the engineering department as well as public works crews to be able to undertake. If you recall, in March of 2013, the city retained AMAC Environment and Infrastructure, we'll refer to them as AMAC, to complete this stormwater management plan. The intent of this was, again, I had covered as far as several of the items we're going to cover, but really to get around truly what do we have as this infrastructure system, that being our stormwater system. And it's not just bricks and mortar. It happens to be as far as the operation and maintenance of that system. It has to deal with as far as regulatory and permit requirements that the city, along with many other communities in the state of Kansas, are regulated under. And so that was really the driving force as far as on us to move forward as far as with this master plan. We're here this evening to give you, I believe, as far as an update. I believe that we're about, I would say, 90% complete with this plan, with the exception of some policy decisions, and we'll get into those at the very end, that deal really with the financial rate structure as far as in the way that we're envisioning and hopefully moving forward as far as with the cities as far as stormwater funding as far as means to address as far as our stormwater infrastructure. We have several individuals that are going to do a tag team type presentation for you this evening. I'm going to let them introduce who they are with AMAC, their role in the program. And once we're done with the program, Mrs. Beatty has some closing remarks that we've given you a sheet this evening that deals with decision points for stormwater program and utility fees. And we're going to walk through that a little bit at the very end of the presentation because, again, it's going to be a policy or policy decisions that we're going to be looking to you as the City Commission as far as to give us as far as a sense of direction as we move forward in bringing this master plan as far as to fruition and use as a living document to use as far as we guide, be it improvements and maintenance as far as of our stormwater infrastructure from not only today, but in many years to come, be it the next 5, 10, even 20 years. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe File. Joe File is the product manager on behalf of AMAC as far as for this program, and he's going to start us out this evening. Joe?
Well, thank you, Greg, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to present this to you tonight. My name is Joe File. I'm with AMEC. I've been with AMEC for about 8 years now, and basically I've been working stormwater my entire career. So I started out with the state of Kansas, worked about 5 years in the dam safety program, and was running that program for the state when I left. I've been in consulting ever since. Stormwater modeling, alternatives analysis, master planning is my background. To my left, this is Mary Halley, and she's been with AMEC and AMEC predecessors for the last 17 years now. She's been essentially in water, stormwater, almost her entire career as well. Her specialty area is working with MS4s, Phase 1 and Phase 2 communities on their NPDES permits to address water quality issues and permit compliance. So those regulatory issues are really Mary's specialty. Then I've got Elizabeth Treadway with me tonight. Elizabeth, you said you'd been with AMEC for about 15 years now.
My anniversary, yeah, 15 years.
And so Elizabeth, the expertise that she brings to this project is financial planning. Elizabeth is an APWA past president, so she's past president of the American Public Works Association. And I should say that also Elizabeth has worked in city shoes in the past. She was the environmental service director previously before coming to AMEC for the city of Greensboro, North Carolina, where you went through you built a stormwater utility and rate structure and got that whole program up off the ground. So that's a little bit of background on the three of us that worked on this project. Also have two other AMEC folks. Brad Johnson is the Topeka office manager that's here with us tonight and was involved in various aspects of the project. And John Covey did a lot of the stormwater modeling that I'll talk about. So just a little bit about our team before we get started. One other thing I'd like to say is Caw Valley was also a part of our project team. They were heavily involved in the inventory and also brought in to provide input and advice and some background on a number of issues as we went through here. So I just want to acknowledge that Caw Valley was part of portions of this project as well. With that, we've got about a 48 slide PowerPoint presentation. We're going to do our best to get through it in about 45 minutes. My understanding is we've got up to an hour and a half. We'll be happy to take any questions as we go along, but we do have a good 45 to 50 minutes of presentation without that, so we'll do our best to get you the information as quickly as we can and answer all of your questions. With that, a quick project overview. What we were asked to do when we entered into contract a little over a year ago is develop a comprehensive stormwater master plan. Part of that, we looked at the city's regulatory compliance history. That included review of a new stormwater permit that came out just early this year during the course of the project. So reviewing that new permit was part of what we did as part of this project. We evaluated the stormwater system, and we completed a comprehensive inventory of the stormwater system, and I'll talk more about that here in some subsequent slides. And then we developed a model of the stormwater system to model how it performs during a variety of rainfall events and rainfall frequencies, and predict where flooding might occur during high events and things like that. So we'll talk about that as well. Based on the stormwater system, we were asked to develop a capital improvement plan for projects that needed capital improvements, whether it be aging infrastructure or capacity issues or other types of concerns. And we were also asked to look at the operations and maintenance program of the city, review the current program as it exists, and then provide recommendation on where changes could be made. Once we had all that information, we took that and we have developed, or we have the bulk of a stormwater business plan developed and awaiting some policy decisions from you all, which is kind of where we'll end up tonight. So we make a recommendation for some options for some stormwater program improvements, and we also have looked at some different rate options which Elizabeth will talk to you about when we get there. So our focus will be first off to go through the current stormwater system. Once we do that and we get through what a recommended CIP looks like and what recommended operation and maintenance looks like. Then we'll go through a little bit of cost of service study where we've developed 4 options for your consideration, one being a do-nothing option, and one being a full funding of all of the identified CIP projects, and then 2 options that are kind of in between that. We'll look at some rate design considerations and some customer impacts associated with those, and we'll have some discussions about that. So the 3 major factors that we focused on that really influence stormwater revenue needs are the stormwater system condition, what are the operation and maintenance needs for the city, and then what are the NPDES permit requirements that the city has to address as part of your current permit, or your current and now new permit. One of the first things we did in this project is we went out and we inventoried the stormwater system. The city had some GIS data of portions of the system. There were some old plans on paper, but there wasn't a comprehensive single location where this stormwater system had been inventoried. So we went out and we collected a bunch of data on the system. And as part of that, we went out and every pipe and every manhole and every inlet and every outlet, we looked at it and we assessed the condition of it. We looked for things like obstructions, we documented the diameter, we documented the length, and all the types of physical features you would think about. But we also looked at things like water quality issues. Are there illicit discharges? Are there stains or odors in the pipe? Are there obstructions? Are there sedimentation issues? And so we collected a whole variety of data, and that's been incorporated into a GIS system which will be turned over to the city at the end of this project and is designed in a way that rolls directly into the city's GIS system as a whole. Caw Valley did a lot of the data collection on this. They were the ones that went out there and did a lot of these assessments, but we worked together very closely so that we were all on the same page about what we were collecting, how we were collecting. This data can also, as the city gets the asset management system up and running, it will roll into the city's asset management system and ultimately can be used to evaluate and prioritize projects in the future. And the nice thing about this data when it's rolled into the asset management plan is projects that were identified as part of the stormwater master plan can also be cross-referenced with other types of projects. Say, for example, you've got a high-priority street replacement, then you can see where there are overlaps between stormwater project and street replacement, so funding can be maximized at those locations. So when we went out and did the inventory, we did an assessment of the condition of the system itself. This example up here, this is just one example. It's an entire database, and the plan has maps of your entire system, so this is just one example. But what you're looking at in the picture in the top right corner is actually the First Street Railroad project that I think you all discussed last week, where the outfall is severely undermined and is actually potentially endangering the railroad itself. So these are conditions, these are just examples of infrastructure issues that we identified as part of this plan, and there's a number of these, and like I say, I just pulled out one example to give you an idea of what we looked at. Each one of our GIS points has photos associated with it, so city staff can go into the GIS system, look at any particular point, pull up the data that was collected, evaluate it, pull up the pictures, look at what was seen in the field at that time. So that's all tied together in a database. Here's another example of a sedimentation issue. One of the issues that we found fairly common within the city where there are sedimentation that's occurring that is limiting the capacity of a lot of these systems. In this case, probably were reduced to less than a quarter of the design capacity at this location. And we found a number of these issues, and those have been identified and prioritized as part of this project. The next thing we did is come up with a criteria, working really closely with Greg and city staff, come up with the criteria to use for evaluating the capacity of this system. And what we ultimately used was Junction City's design criteria for these systems. So what we have is we went and we looked at all of your street crossings and we actually assigned a value to each of the storm sewer systems or the conveyance systems based on the classification of the road system that it was crossing or the particular area that it was assigned to. So we've got some areas that have a 50-year or a 2% annual chance flooding criteria. We've got other ones that have a 10-year or a 10% annual chance flooding criteria. And that's just based on the level of service that had been established in the design criteria. And I think the key point I'd like to make is that your design criteria is very consistent with APWA criteria. It's very consistent with other communities throughout the state of Kansas. And so this is a very common way of doing this, and it's very much the same as what other communities within the state are doing. The next thing we did is we sat down with a number of city staff. Caw Valley was present. And before we did any modeling or any assessment of capacity, we went through a series of discussions about what known flooding issues are there, what has been observed in the past. And it so happened late last summer we had a couple of rains. We were able to get some information from that. Chris did a good job of going around and taking some pictures of videos during the flooding. But this map was put together very early on, and actually that rain kind of validated some of what was being seen. But we put together a list of flooding concerns, whether it was complaints from the public, whether it was things city staff had seen, and we consolidated those into a single map. And I think there was a map downstairs on the first floor for a while that that was put up that showed a summary of these concerns. So we did that early on. From there, what we did is we built a model of the stormwater system, and I won't spend a lot of time on that. We could certainly come and I'll be happy to answer any questions about it. But we modeled the entire stormwater system within the city limits. Certainly we modeled the drainage with outside the city, so anywhere that water comes into the city, we created a model of that, determined how much runoff there is. We modeled every pipe and conduit in the system that is greater than 24 inches in diameter. And we essentially evaluated where there are capacity issues with the system that doesn't meet the established design criteria that we had decided that would be the criteria we would evaluate to. What we found is that the results of the modeling, if the red lines are areas where the modeling showed significant capacity deficiencies in the system, what we found is that those deficiencies overlaid very well with what city staff and Caw Valley and others had already observed. So it matched up, the modeling matched up very well with what we knew to be true when we, I guess, started the modeling. So they tended to validate each other, and that was a really good thing. So once we had a comprehensive model created, and we had the inventory completed, we understood the infrastructure systems, we understood the aging issues associated with the infrastructure. We understood the deficiencies, we understood the obstructions, and we understood the capacities issues. We were able to consolidate and prioritize that into a capital improvement plan. And it was based on all the things we've talked about. It was based some on the modeling. It was based some on our visual assessment. It was based on some city staff observations and things that the city had already known about. And we consolidated that into a CIP, and eventually we ended up ranking that into 4 tiers. And so for those 4 tiers, what we did is we came up with a fairly small tier 1, and those were those projects that pose a danger to public safety or critical infrastructure, or projects that could be completed at no cost very easily in-house by city staff. There's a couple things in Tier 1 that we identified that could be essentially accomplished very easily by city staff, and so we went ahead and made those recommendations in Tier 1 because we could get them done immediately. But those Tier 1 projects are like the railroad project that you took on, that you took action on last week, I believe. Mm-hmm. There's also the Price Ravine project, which has some significant erosion, which has the potential, if left unchecked, to damage critical infrastructure. The next tier of projects were those projects that have both physical aging issues as well as significant capacity issues where flooding problems had been noted in the past. And also projects where we felt like if left unaddressed over the next 20 years could very easily elevate themselves to Tier 1 type projects. Tiers 3 and 4 have identified deficiencies. There are concerns, but best we could tell, they don't pose any immediate danger to public safety. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that someone couldn't be driving down the road during a flood and there couldn't be an accident, because that absolutely could happen. It's just there hadn't been the complaints, there hadn't been the issues observed, and frankly, with some of these other higher priority ones, we had to come up with a way to group those into a lower tier. So there are projects that don't have as many issues associated with the aging. There's not as much damage to the infrastructure itself. So from that, we created kind of and really I've got this in a 2-tier CIP program, and really as we get into some additional considerations and some of those different options, I talked about where we've got 4 options, that's where it'll become apparent why we've broken this into Tier 1 and 2 and Tier 3 and 4. But for right now, what we did is we developed a CIP plan for every single one of these projects. This is just an example of one of these projects. So we've got the length of pipe. The cost estimates were based on DOT bid tabs. So if we were recommending a double 4x6 box, then we went out to KDOT bid tabs, and we got bids from the region within the state where these similar projects had been completed recently, but in the last couple of years by the DOT. We used their costs to develop the costs for our CIPs, and then what we did is we added a 25% contingency to that, which I believe is consistent with some other CIP plans that have recently been done here in the city. And then on top of that, we added 20% project costs, which would cover things like design, construction management, administrative fees, things like that. So ultimately, based on the costs we came up with, you could just say that we added a multiplier of 1.5 for contingency and project costs and all those other things. And that's how the cost of these CIPs were established. So here's a list of them. There's actually 15 of them, but the first 3 are either no cost or they're in progress through other funding. So that's kind of the discrepancy between the 12 and the 15 is really there's only 12 that we're looking at needing to fund going forward for these Tier 1 and Tier 2 CIPs. We did exactly the same thing for the Tier 3 and 4 projects. There's an additional 20 of these, and the individual project costs total just over $23 million. Once we were done developing this CIP plan, we evaluate, or simultaneously in developing this CIP plan, we evaluated operation and maintenance. And one of the things we did is evaluated remedial needs. So if you remember back to that pipe that had sedimentation that was sitting into it in the picture, I mean, we've got a remedial need on a lot of these systems to remove the sediment. And then once we do that, then we've got an ongoing maintenance need to continue to maintain and keep them free of debris and flowing. So we developed some cost estimates associated with the need to just operate and maintain infrastructure. Obstructions was a big one, so it kind of stood alone because we do have a lot of these silted in areas that these need to be cleared out and removed, and we developed costs associated with that and applied it to the maintenance program over a period of time. The city has 12 detention facilities that they're currently operating, responsible for, and a number of these detention dams have some pretty significant maintenance needs at this time that, if left unchecked, could very easily turn into CIP projects. There's some erosion associated with some of the spillways. There's trees and overgrowth, which for dams is just something you really don't want to see. It does impact the integrity of dams. And there's just other maintenance needs associated with these facilities. Outfall structures is a big one. One of the things we noted throughout the city is that there seems to be a systematic problem with outfall structures and the way they're being constructed within Junction City. And we're seeing a lot of outfalls that are undermining and falling into the receiving stream from the outfall structure itself. And I believe over the last 3 or 4 years, you all have actually done some emergency repairs on a couple of those outfall structures. And I can tell you there are a lot more of those out there sleeping, and it's impossible to predict whether one of them is going to become an issue in the next 2 years or whether 10 of them are going to become an issue in the next 2 years, but there are a lot of these structures that have been designed like that. So we noted a number of remediation items that need to be addressed. The other thing we noted is that we're making some recommendations for some additional design criteria. The design criteria you have is very good. We used it throughout. It's very consistent. But there are some additional things that we're going to recommend. One of the big ones is dams. There doesn't appear, dams and detention facility, there's a little bit of criteria, but there doesn't seem to be any safety criteria associated with dams. One of the things we're going to make a recommendation is that some criteria be developed for outfall structures and potentially a change be made associated with how outfall are designed in the city, so you don't continue to build structures in a way that they're going to cause you maintenance headaches almost immediately after construction. So that's a quick summary of the CIP program and the remedial part of operation and maintenance. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So Joe has been walking you through the fact that we've examined the stormwater system, we've examined remedial maintenance needs, and applied costs to those needs. Within the operations and maintenance realm as well, one of the things that we became aware of pretty early on in looking at past stormwater fund budgets was that there was no accounting for the fixed assets of the stormwater program. Now, the program doesn't own any assets. Those are owned by Public Works, but certainly the stormwater services that are provided here in the city use some of the assets of the Public Works department and of the streets maintenance budget that are supported by the street maintenance budget. So Mr. McCaffrey and I worked together. He has a fixed assets list. He also has a fixed assets replacement plan and like a building refurbishment plan for the next 10 years. And looking at that plan, he identified those fixed assets which were relevant to the stormwater management program, and between Mr. McCaffrey and Ms. Beatty, estimated a usage of those assets toward the stormwater program. So as part of accounting for the cost of the existing stormwater program, we now have these fixed assets and the costs that you're going to see fairly soon. And one of the points I wanted to make really about these fixed assets is that, again, they're currently handled by the Streets Fund. They haven't been handled by the Stormwater Fund in the past. And so there has been some subsidizing of the stormwater services and Stormwater Fund through other budgets and other funds in the city. Moving on out of operations and maintenance to the NPDES permit that is held by the city, I'm going to give you just a 2-slide quick review background. I know you've heard about this permit, but to refresh your memories on exactly what it is and what it requires. The permit is administered by KDHE. They're given regulatory authority from EPA. The first permit the city received was in 2004, and that was effective through 2009. The second permit, as Joe said, came early this year in February. In between 2009 and February of 2014, the city was covered. There was no stoppage of permit requirements. It's just that the permit itself was not effective, and KDHE had some mechanism to continue the permitting through that interim period. That's fairly standard in many states across the nation. The permit is a narrative permit. Essentially, the state lays out its requirements, and the city proposes the best management practices, BMPs, that it is willing to commit to the program to comply with those requirements. It puts forward the measurable goals and the metrics to measure its own compliance, and then reports annually on compliance. Those are the basics of the permit. In the state of Kansas, KDHE requires each permitted entity to update and implement a stormwater management plan. That is the list of BMPs that the city proposes to comply with the permit. And that plan has to have the best management practices for 6 minimum control measures, and you see a list of them there, ranging from public education through construction, after construction, illicit discharges, and then good housekeeping for city services. In the 2004 permit, it reads within these 6 minimum control measures very, very similarly, or exactly the same actually, to the 2004 permit, the first permit cycle. However, there are some rather onerous stream monitoring requirements that are new with the second permit. Monitoring seems to be a second permit cycle thing in many states, and Kansas has some of the most stringent requirements requiring stream monitoring, multiple stream monitoring on a number of streams quarterly during storm events. This is not a small order to make. Those are required starting this year. And so it adds a lot of planning and adds a lot of resource need to go ahead and collect those samples and get them analyzed and report that data to the state. In the future, the next permit in Kansas should come out in 2019. One of the things that definitely is relevant in most permits, MS4 permits in the future, is a tie between what you do for water quality and your program of services for water quality to comply with the permit and what you're doing to manage the operations and maintenance of your program. For example, Joe showed a couple of pictures of silted-in storm drains and culverts. In the future, the permit is going to want to see that Junction City has a mature enough program to know that the CIPs that you do and the remedial operations and maintenance that you do recognize that sediment is a pollutant of interest around Junction City and in the streams around Junction City, and that that siltation needs to be handled in a proactive manner. So there will become a tie between what you do in operations and maintenance and what you're doing on the water quality side. The permit, again, is a narrative permit, and the way the city's compliance is measured is essentially if the city does what it's told KDHE that it's going to do in its stormwater management plan, then it is in compliance. And so the city streams could have pollution getting worse, the rivers around the city could have pollution that gets worse, but as long as the city is doing what they've proposed to do in the way of best management practices, they're in compliance. If pollution gets worse, that doesn't mean that the next permit won't have more onerous requirements, but it's not a compliance issue. Okay? Reviewing the city's stormwater management plan and their program of BMPs. There are 27 BMPs in the current program. We found that in AMEC's opinion, 20 of those BMPs are deficient. Remember, I just said that if you implement the stormwater management program as you wrote it and as you proposed it, that is your measure of compliance. You then have to implement that plan and report to KDHE. What we found is that some of those BMPs are not implemented at all. Some of them might be not implemented as they were proposed. So there's a disconnect between what's in the stormwater management plan and what the city is actually doing. And then some of them may not be deficient, but they're lacking adequate content, which could raise a red flag. So you're not reporting what you said you would report, or you're not reporting sufficiently as compared with normal standards for a Phase 2 community. There's some strong elements to the city's program. Certainly your erosion control regulation is a good regulation. With this project, you now have a very good set of outfall maps. The city has performed a visual inventory of those maps. Those hit some of the very basic requirements of this permit. But we also found there's some overly strong elements, and a permittee can always be more stringent than the requirements of their permit. However, in Junction City's case, for instance, the illicit discharge ordinance is quite a stringent ordinance, and it says a lot more and implies that the city has a much stronger program and will enforce that program than really the resources of the city allow. And so while it's nice to be more stringent, you've got to be able to back that up with the resources to implement and enforce that ordinance. So there's some things that I think the city could back down on and still be just great in terms of compliance. So overall, the program needs balance, right-sizing those things. It needs cohesion. The best Phase 2 permit programs run well when they are cohesive with the other aspects of your stormwater management program. So what you're doing for operations and maintenance needs to have water quality in mind, and then you're spending $1 to do two things rather than $2 to do two things. So dedicated attention, I'll talk about that in a minute. One of the main points of this slide, however, is in AMEC's opinion, we're not a regulatory authority, but in our opinion, the city is at risk of a non-compliance finding should an audit occur, just because of the deficiencies that are in the program. This is just an example of what you would find in the report that we wrote. This is one of the minimum control measures for illicit discharges. That center column called assessment results shows really our evaluation of each of the BMPs in that minimum control measure, and then a summary of our recommendation. The recommendations are provided in enormous detail in the report. If you want to go to sleep tonight very well, just start reading that and you'll be right off. But there are quite a few recommendations in that report, and a lot of good guidance, and also some text to go ahead and put in the next stormwater management plan. Short-term strategy to write this is to balance the program. I've talked about getting it just right, not too strong, not too light. Think Goldilocks. Optimize your reporting metrics and your BMPs so that you're implementing a program that the city can handle. Stabilize some of the basic elements. The city has had a permit from 2004. You're now in your second permit cycle, and there are some BMPs from the first permit cycle that are not being addressed. In fact, there's an entire minimum control measure that is not addressed. And so again, an auditor coming in is going to see really some of the basic things not addressed when there should be some maturity in the program at this point. You need to start that stream monitoring. That's the real new requirement. Planning should be underway, and outfall monitoring should be ongoing starting this summer. This little check mark says that the executive summary provides those recommendations. That's not right. The report provides all 23 of our recommendations. Over the long term, make sure that we're executing the program as it's proposed to KDHE. Again, if you do what you say you're going to do, you're in compliance. If what you're doing doesn't work for you, or you're resource limited and you think there are other things you can do that maybe hits the same mark, you have an annual basis, you have an annual opportunity to go ahead and change that and write that program for Junction City. The next opportunity is in February of 2015. That's the first opportunity within this new permit to propose a new stormwater management plan. That is an absolute optimum time to go ahead and propose the right-sized program to KDHE and start getting it implemented. Finally, I would suggest that you hire or identify from within someone to manage the permit. Your staff is doing what they can with the resources they have, but everyone's wearing a lot of hats. And really, the best programs, even the minimal compliance programs, have someone whose first responsibility, before any other's responsibility, is to have oversight of their program. That doesn't mean other people won't be implementing parts of that program. You might have a site inspector doing erosion control and a public works director overseeing staff training for pollution control. But there needs to be someone that's kind of making sure all those wheels are moving in the right direction and they're being reported properly. Talking with city staff, we talked about starting that part-time and phasing it in gradually. In terms of cost, that is phased in the plan program you're going to see in a few moments, phased into a full-time position starting in 2019 when the new permit comes out. And a lot of folks are sharing that initial position with someone in wastewater who maybe has a permitting background. They tend to be able to hit the ground running in terms of permit oversight. Okay, so we've talked with you about what your existing program is, what it does, what the deficiencies are, whether they're stormwater system deficiencies, whether they're operations and maintenance deficiencies, or NPDES deficiencies. So we're now going to move into the cost of all of this. First thing we needed to do certainly was to go ahead and identify what are the costs of the existing program. And I've boiled down a lot of data into this very small table, but essentially captures the main line items for the fund: personnel, commodities, contract services, capital. You'll see a 0 in this line item for this year's existing program cost. In fact, in out years, that's not a 0. There were no fixed assets costs in 2014 that were attributed to the stormwater program. Those replacement costs begin in 2015. So they are translated into the future program costs. Also, you see in here are your franchise fee transfer that's standard and kind of remains there, and also the debt service that's related to the infrastructure investments that were made in the mid-2000s. That debt service remains, as we plan for the future, remains at that level that you see there, $450,000 a year. The franchise fee transfer gets cut in half in the remaining years. So your total expenses right now of your existing program as it stands today is a little over a little under $1.2 million.
And that doesn't necessarily align with your current budget, because that is pulling in some of those services that are currently tied to other budgets right now, but are truly stormwater type of services, and that's why there's the difference.
Okay, so through discussions with staff, all of this was presented to them. And the main question was, let's talk about what the priorities are. Well, how do we want to plan for the future? Let's not think about costs yet. Let's just understand what the priorities might be. And in the mind of staff, with all of this information on system condition and regulatory requirements and things like that, we talked about certainly addressing the highest risks first. And those were identified as the Tier 1 CIPs, the ones that were most serious toward critical infrastructure, public safety. You voted on the one last week, or you proposed to move forward on the railroad last week. The second highest priority was certainly getting your regulatory NPDES permit compliance in line, and moving on down, trying to address remedial maintenance and move toward a more proactive maintenance operations and maintenance program. And then further down the list, we start addressing the Tier 2 CIPs within about 10 years. Those are the serious CIPs, but not critical. If remedial maintenance is not happening, if proactive maintenance is not happening, those certainly will all eventually age and deteriorate even further. And then moving down the list of CIPs, addressing 3 and 4 after 2025. So using those priorities, we developed 4 future program options. Option 1 being do nothing. Doing nothing is certainly an option. That would mean no changes to your existing program. It certainly has the lowest cost. You're not doing anything. That lowest cost is still exceeding the current Stormwater Fund revenue of $800,000 a year. But that also carries the highest risk. You haven't done anything about permit compliance. You haven't done anything about the critical public safety CIPs. Moving on from that is a minimal program option where you address those 2 highest risks, your critical CIPs, your NPDES permit issues. Add, I think, 1 staff, I'll show in a minute, to help a little bit with remedial maintenance. Then moving further to a moderate program, we're addressing both the critical and the serious Tier 2 CIPs, and the program gradually adds staff to become more proactive in terms of operations and maintenance. You're taking care of your permit. And then finally, all the way up to option 4, a maximum program, we're addressing all of the deficiencies that AMEC identified in this process. That has the lowest risk, certainly over time, but also has a very high cost. In looking at these, we decided that we would no longer consider the do nothing and maximum program options from the rate and what this does to the revenue side of the house standpoint. They certainly are options that can be considered, but at this point I'm going to defer from talking about those 2 options any further and dwell really on the option 2 and 3 minimal and moderate programs. the left side of the column, the left column there is the priorities, 1 through 5. And then it's kind of hard to see the heading there, but the middle column is how that priority might be addressed by the minimal program, and then the right column is how the priority is addressed by the moderate program. And for the most critical items, the Tier 1 CIPs and your NPDES deficiencies, both programs are the same. They're addressing those critical items first. They start to differ as you move to remedial and proactive maintenance. The minimum program adds limited remedial maintenance ability by adding a little over a person and a half. That's a clerk, that's a maintenance worker, and I think the part-time, as another part-time maintenance worker that's being brought up to full-time. Yeah, yeah. Moving to the moderate program, you gain more ability on remedial and proactive maintenance by adding another maintenance worker almost immediately in 2015, and then in 2024, 10 years from now, going ahead and adding 2 more. So you're chipping away at your remedial maintenance, working toward a proactive system. Tier 2 CIPs are not addressed in the minimal program. Most of them are addressed in the moderate program using revenue bonds. Tier 3 and 4 CIPs are not addressed in the minimal program. In the moderate program, they're analyzed and reprioritized in 2013. So if you've got some remedial maintenance capability and you've got some proactive maintenance capability, the thought is that you are going to be able to impact and influence some of those Tier 3 and 4 CIPs because you're addressing and taking care of some of your system. So they're not seeing the pressure that they're seeing today. And so the hope is that you can offset some of your post-10-year costs by doing some proactive and remedial maintenance now, and maybe those Tier 3 and 4 CIPs aren't all Tier 1 and 2 CIPs after 2024. You've got less of a list to deal with. Okay? This is really a graphical representation of the minimal and moderate programs. The biggest difference that you see here in the purple is the CIP options. You have a little bit of difference in personnel, a lot of difference in how you address your CIPs. The main point in this slide is to look on the left-hand side there, the minimal program. After the first 3 years, you really don't have capital costs other than your fixed asset costs. And so the program is going to drop back into what it is today, where deficiencies are building up and not being addressed. In the moderate program, you've got operations and maintenance, and you're taking care of those CIP costs and hopefully not dropping back. Well, you will not drop back. You're addressing your system issues. This slide says 20-year comparison. I apologize. It's a 10-year comparison. This is a cost of service analysis for both of those programs, minimal program in yellow, moderate program in purple. The point of this slide really is to show a comparison of the two side by side and also to give you a sense of where they stand relative to your current stormwater fund revenue. AMEC's recommendation, based on what we've presented to you, is to look really hard, consider implementing option 3, the moderate program option. That gives you the best mix of benefits versus cost. It eliminates your highest risks by 2016. Again, you're chipping away at remedial maintenance and adding proactive maintenance. Again, you're gradually adding that maintenance by 2024. And you're paying attention to your system. So again, you're hopefully not creating more Tier 1 and Tier 2 CIPs in an unmanageable way. I'll turn it now to Elizabeth.
And thank you for, again, allowing us to come before you tonight to talk about these things. As part of the project that we undertook, we were asked to look at the way revenues are generated today on behalf of the support for stormwater services, how the rate is currently designed, and really how does it stand against industry standards as a revenue generator, and what do we do about the fact that we're not meeting the demand for resources even under the do-nothing option. And so I took a look at some historical information, not only here but around the country, and want to give you a little bit of background about the industry and the industry standard when it comes to establishment of utilities in support of drainage and drainage systems. So the move to a utility for stormwater actually started over 40 years ago. So the practice of using the same sort of principles that we see well established in our water and sewer industry really do have a long history in this country. And we have emerged from a relative obscurity as a process of utility fees for stormwater to what is now thousands of communities across North America who are using a utility structure to support their drainage systems. And there are good reasons why. It allows you to really put your drainage program on a strong business foundation. So when you are utility financing, you have the requirement within your funding program really to match both your resource demands with your revenue demand. And it really does stabilize then your ability to accomplish the goals that we just talked to you about, the really important and complex issues that are facing you. And I will tell you, you're not alone in this. That communities have been struggling with drainage issues and stormwater issues, and it seems to be exacerbated these days by some very significant change in intensity, not only of the storms themselves, but where they're hitting. You know, if you look at the news last night and see Boston, 70-mile-an-hour winds in a thunderstorm. I mean, these are things happening across our industry that are really putting pressure on our drainage systems everywhere. So you're certainly not alone when it comes to those kinds of issues and the things that we're seeing within the industry. But when we look at financing and how we got to the place where these were being looked at as utilities, it's really around the principle of an equitable way to address a public infrastructure. And so the principles that were put in place and have been long established now over this 40-plus year period really do reinforce concepts of who should pay and why should they pay. So historically, just as we did in the water and sewer industry, we were using principally community taxing power to support public works infrastructure. The problem with that, of course, whether you're doing a tax on real property or a tax on income, is that there's really no correlation back to the services and the public services that need to be provided. As you see the water and sewer industry emerge, we see the establishment of the concept of a meter, a way in which we allocate costs out to various properties. And as we have matured in the stormwater utility business, we now see a meter established in stormwater. In this case, it's not a physical instrument. In fact, is the correlation between what causes the demand for a public system and its trigger on a property-by-property basis. And historically, what we do understand is that these services are driven by urbanization. You go out into open country, you don't find the sophisticated drainage levee kinds of systems that we have to have because we have, as a human race, decided to join together and live in commune in cities and towns across our country. And as a result of that, urbanization, the fact that we densify the presence of hard surfaces, we increase then the amount of runoff that has to be managed, and ultimately over centuries we have made the decision to place that runoff into pipes, ditches, man-made structure in order to then discharge them back into the natural system. And so we have a physical infrastructure that is really being created by demand that is triggered by development practices. And so when we look at the principles around utilities and rates for stormwater, that basic principle of cost allocation takes us back to the concept of a metered distribution of cost, and that linkage in the industry is impervious presence. Building structure, driveways, parking lots, rooftop, sidewalks, those things that interrupt the natural system's ability to manage its own runoff. And so what we see on a national basis is the use of imperviousness on a property as the metered distribution of our public system costs. So when we looked at the concept of equitable, we were told by staff that there are concerns in the community that your current allocation of those costs and the rate structure that's established doesn't create the outcomes that give a sense of fairness, a sense of a fair distribution of those costs on a property-by-property basis. So when you look at the industry, there's your house, there's your driveway, it's got a nice public road out front. In the water and sewer industry, got a water line, nice little meter sitting there, tells us how much water is going into that property. We've typically got then a lateral, goes out to a collection line, takes that used water to a treatment works for pollution control, ultimate discharge. We have the same issue for the runoff that's created by those hard surfaces that lead to the need for what is generated locally by property but demands that there be a public system in place in order to manage it. So when we think about equity, we think about the boundaries then of these physical systems and what we use to measure how we would allocate the cost. So what we see in rate practices across the country, we typically find rates being established two different ways. One historically was developed because of the tools that we had at hand 40 years ago in order to decide how to allocate the cost. And that was the concept of an equivalency to a single-family residential property. And in that principle, we take all of the single-family residential properties, we measure the imperviousness across all those properties, we create an average, and that average becomes the billing unit that we calculate then all other properties' imperviousness by. So if, as we have done in Junction City, your average single-family home's imperviousness is just a little bit more than 2,500 square feet, we would set that as the billing unit. All single-family homes would then pay on the same basis, would be treated as one rate class, and all other properties would then have their imperviousness measured and divided by 2,500 square feet, a single billing unit, to get their relative equivalency to a single-family home. Some basic math occurs. The industry has advanced in its ability to be more sophisticated in its calculations, and we also see now a move to establishing a billing unit on a unit basis of square footage. So regardless of type of property, this creates ultimately the greatest equity in the distribution of the cost against developed property by establishing a 500 square foot billing unit or a 1,000 square foot billing unit, a 1,500 square foot billing unit, but a single number so that all properties are treated against that billing unit, regardless of whether it's a single family home or whether it's Coliseum or some big university. We bill everybody. It's another principle. We start from everybody pays into the utility. Other features that we build into rates typically are a process for appeals and adjustments, because sometimes the bills are wrong and you need to have the ability to be fair and adjust bills as they go forward. Someone may take a structure down, someone may add to a structure, and so the imperviousness changes on the property, and you have to have a good business practice, a billing process that allows you to do that. Also, we see in about 50% of our utilities that there is a process for a credit against a bill. And that policy is typically applied where someone on their property has taken a proactive approach and is addressing a need that is a public need, and therefore investing their own dollars in helping avoid a public cost. A good example. We're seeing a lot more under the water quality requirements under permits for the proactive treatment of stormwater before it's discharged through either man-made treatment works, through wetlands. There are just a variety of ways, bioswales, infiltration trenches. There are just lots of things that are coming up in the industry today. If you had a commercial center that had invested on their property, put in, let's say, trees into the parking lot, put in bioswales, allowed the runoff to go through a filter system before it reached the public system, that would be the kind of thing where we would see in a utility that a public cost has been avoided by that property. So your demand for having to invest in those treatment strategies would be lessened by someone having taken that proactive approach, and in some cases it's design standards and they're required to do it. Then there's a crediting mechanism, a way in which their fee is actually reduced because of private dollars being invested to solve a public problem. So those are tools typically that we see as industry standard. So when we looked at your rate structure, what we see is a flat rate for single-family homes that are developed at $5 a month or $60 a year. For undeveloped single-family lots, it's $3 a month or $36 a year. And where you have residential property with multiple meters, you're actually charging them on a per meter basis, and that meter creates a $36 per meter charge. So depending on how many meters might be in a multifamily situation, they would each be paying a $36 a year fee or $3 a month. The principles that we see here really are that everybody is involved in paying regardless of the status of the property. But it's also very simplistic, and it does not tie itself back to the presence of imperviousness, which is, again, is that trigger. What is that need? What is the demand being created for having an operating public system? When you look at non-residential properties, now we really start to see the drift away from a sense of equity. You have very large groupings. These are billed on the size of the lot. It's not related back to what's on the lot. It's not related in, if you look at the multiple relationship between one number and another, and the relationship as how the buckets, the size of the distribution of that lot size changes, there's not a mathematical correlation here. We're starting to get away from a sense of balance in the way the current rates are structured. And thus you have, as I understand it, concern from the community that this isn't quite right, that there is a problem in the sense of fairness and equity around this particular rate structure. So we know that there are some important policy decisions. I would love to be able to stand up here and say to you, based on the moderate program recommendation, we think your rate under an impervious-based rate structure ought to be X. And I can't give you that yet. We need to talk about some important policy issues, and we'll right at the end get right back to this slide and do that. But there are some important principles that we'd like you to think about. And again, things like, should you use credits? What about this developed, undeveloped business? So we actually went out and started looking at what's going on in the real world in your community. This graph gives you a sense of who's paying now. So currently, your residential properties, multifamily and single family, are covering about 62% of that $800,000. And all other properties are contributing about 38% of the revenue. When you look at changing that to an impervious base, the next two pie charts show you how the imperviousness shifts in the community. So if we used the concept in the upper left corner, which is that equivalent residential, the 2,500 square foot billing unit, that shift changes dramatically to the non-residential properties. There's a little bit more of that shift if we go to a single unit billing of 1,000 square feet, for example. So you can see basically who owns the imperviousness in the community versus who's currently paying for stormwater services. So I wanted to show you some examples so that we could see real world. These are from your community. These are taken from your impervious cover. The first example is a small home. So currently that small home pays $60 a year. It's one billing unit. If we look at its imperviousness, it's a little more than 1,200 square feet of imperviousness is present there. If we went to an equivalent residential unit, it would still be a single billing unit. But if we go to a unit of 1,000 square feet, it becomes two billing units. We typically, as we do in the water and sewer industry, we round up. You buy whole units of cost. Now that, again, is a detail in policy that we would certainly be able to discuss with you. We could round down, we could use natural rounding rather than round up, but for purposes of just giving you a sense of how this might play out in the community, we round it up in this case. Then let's look at another residential property, and it changes dramatically the conversation, as it's 26,000 square feet of imperviousness. It also pays $60 a year today. If we went to a flat rate residential rate, the 2,500 square foot billing unit, it would continue to pay the same as the small one we just talked about. But if we go to 1,000 square feet billing unit, it now takes on 26 billing units a year. Now, what we can't do is give you the math to say, well, how is that relative to dollars? And until we can make some policy decisions about the way the rate ought to be structured, it's difficult to tell you then what is the actual cost. But I think you can get a sense that this particular property is 13 times larger than the small lot that we looked at before. And there's some equity that you need to think about and what you want to be able to deliver back to the citizens and how comfortable you are and they should be in the way that the rate might go in the wrong way. Sorry. Here's another interesting case. Here's a fourplex. This is one that has 4 meters. So it's paying 4 times 36 a year, $144. When we measure its imperviousness, it's about 5,600 square feet. It's 2 or 3 billing units if we go to an ERU evaluation, because it's now more than one, because it has multiple dwelling units in it. If we measure it on the 600 or on the 1,000 square feet, we've got 6 billing units that'll be paid by 4 people versus 1 now being paid for each. If you see the math, we'd treat it as a single property. We wouldn't care that there are 4 houses in it. We would treat it as a single property and divide the bill up by 4 people. This is a winner, and there are winners and losers when you change a rate structure. There are always going to be winners and losers. Here's a great case of what a winner looks like, because these folks are, from a comparative analysis, potentially paying more into the fund than an equitable distribution, either on a ERU basis or on a billing unit basis than they should be. So let's take a look at a commercial property just to bring this home further. This particular commercial property is in the 2nd tier rate. They're paying $384 a year. they look like 15 homes. Even if you use today's rate of $60 a year per home, that bill ought to be $900, not $384, on an equitable basis of property by property analysis. So you can see we're struggling with how to bring you back the best recommendation we can on how to address your revenue shortfall, because today your revenues don't meet your stormwater program needs, and the only way that those services are being delivered is taking those resources from other funds, from other resources. There has to be a case where, and we know the streets budget is being used to provide stormwater services, to get us even up to the do-nothing, you really ought to look at a rate increase. Regardless of whether you change the rate structure, you really ought to think about a rate increase and let the streets fund get back to doing its streets business and fully fund the stormwater program. But we need your guidance. And so we've offered a couple of recommendations. I think you have them in front of you, and certainly would like to have an opportunity to talk about those.
The sheet in front of you talks, Greg and I and AMAC, all of the AMAC staff, had a real lively debate on how to wrap this up for you. And so we came to the decision point that the stormwater utility has to look at the level of service. What we're going to recommend to you is the moderate approach, as you heard earlier, the strategy to move forward. The principle of allocation, as you just heard her say, has to be a policy decision by this board. Balancing the equity, the stability, the fairness, the simplicity, whatever you land on, what you think is a fair system based on what we've just shown you, what's across the nation versus what we're doing now, needs to be decided. And then the policy on the allocation bit, the impervious versus lot size versus developed and undeveloped. And the secondary decision of billing is the unit structure and whether or not we're going to put a ceiling on a fee. The ceiling on the fee is a critical issue because if you base it solely off an impervious service, a large facility, commercial facility, is going to have a very large bill. If you put a ceiling on that, that doesn't mean that we're not going to raise the money that we need for this. It just means that you're going to shift it back to residential and other smaller commercial businesses if you put a cap on the very large impervious services. You're going to shift it to someone else. So you have to decide whether there is going to be a ceiling or not a ceiling on, are you going to base it strictly on fairness and stability of the rate structure? Because that was part of the issue when we initially discussed this. One of the very first issues that came to me when I started working here was the landlord association coming and saying how unfair our stormwater system was. We'd asked for the study then. We had so many other things on our platter, we delayed that. Now we're at the study, getting it done, and asking you the very same things again about the fairness issue of what our current system is versus what we think we should go to, which is an ERU unit. But whether you have a straight ER unit system or you have one that's capped depends on where the money gets allocated within that ERU unit structure. Because this is something that you can't make a decision on tonight, because this is a work session, we want you to absorb what we've talked about tonight. And because we don't think that this can happen overnight either, we have two recommendations, and you can choose either one. To have staff simply work through this and give something back to you, or we form a community-based stakeholders group. And we talked earlier today of possibly a stakeholders group, kind of what we did with the animal control rewrite of the code is getting a committee together and over a 1-month period in the month of August tackle this issue with at least 2 commissioners on it, staff being Greg and myself, having 2 to 3 businessmen from the community on it, some business leaders, maybe the chamber being one of them, Chamber and Economic DDC being one of those, and 2 other businessmen, and then 2 community members at large. Having a stakeholders group formed to talk about this, debate it out, and figure out what is the best for Junction City to move this forward. It is a complicated issue, but at the same time, these are all the things that you tasked us to do with, and now we've reached a point where we say we've discovered what is norm across the nation. Now what next? What do you want us to do next? We can come back to you with a recommendation, what we consider is the right thing to do. But if we don't have your input, that we could be going down the wrong path. So we're asking now for direction based on that.
There's one consideration I want to make sure is taken care of, and those that are the seniors and the folks on fixed incomes. There's some that can handle it and some can't. And I know we're moving people out of the community already, and we still have to have things fixed. But the people that can afford it should, and those that can't, we cannot ask them to choose between living, medication, or food.
Well, typically, there's where your ERU unit, they're typically living in a smaller home. And if you go into ERU units, they wouldn't be seeing a major increase in their rate. They're going to see some. But that depends on where you structure it. If you start talking about ceilings and having caps, and then that pushes everything down to the residential, all the way down to that 1 ERU unit price going up. So it depends on where you're comfortable with. Because right now, we have agencies, large, I won't say who, but large agencies that are only paying $100 a month, $1,200 a year, or when they should be paying more like $15,000 a year. And that's why, as you saw in those graphic slides she showed, the circles, right now it's our residential customers that are paying the most of the charges, and there's where your inequity goes, where the impervious surface is really the commercial and industrial with the large parking lots, large warehouses, large buildings that are causing the utility, the issues of how big the pipes are, where the water goes, pollution controls, meeting our permit requirements. All of those is what's causing the issue. And is it fair that the residential is paying for that versus the commercial? Now, the idea of the credits is also something that you need to discuss. If those large impervious services want to deal with their own stormwater within their own property, and you give them credits for that, that's an issue that's good. It's a win-win for both parties. You reduce their rate, but at the same time, they're also not creating a problem for you in your system. And the totality of the system, as you heard, which did not surprise us, this community wasn't addressing their permit requirements. We could have foregone told you that we weren't meeting them, because we knew when you only have a half-time person that's allocated for simply sweeping the streets, we could have told you easily that we weren't meeting the permit requirements, and that has to be addressed immediately. We've allocated in next year's budget 2 full-time people, and in intention of going to 3 full-time by 2016. So, and slowly, as she said, ratcheting it up so that we can address this, even the staffing issues to know how to do this and how to manage it and help this process along. But these are things that we're going to need a decision on. Where do you want us to go next with this, so that we can finish up this study, and if we decide on a moderate program and what the rate structure should look like, then we can come back to you and say, okay, now that you've decided that, and over the 10-year period, this is what you're going to do, then we can say, okay, that we need so much money per year, and then back it into what is the rate going to be then. But until those decisions are made, we can't back that in. Did I explain that? Yeah, back that in. We've got to come in the back door, because right now the front door has too much information flowing out of it. We need to shut the doors and decide what are to do.
And how much of a decision can we legally give you tonight?
Right now, if you like either a staff, if your consensus, let's just staff do it, and we come back to something, or if you want to have a stakeholders group, that's our two recommendations at this point.
In regards to the stakeholders group, how long would it take really to realistically put together a group,
Oh, I think
company group?
we could get names to you shortly. I mean, those could be, the mayor has the power to form a group of any kind at any time, a working group. We could get names to you for a group to be put together, and we can have a series of meetings in August, September. Within a 2-month time period, I think we could have a decision back to you. Or the goal in this case was to have a decision on the rates before year end, so that it impacts our next year's budget.
Stakeholders group sounds like the best opportunity to get the consensus of the community. They get involved. They're part of the decision-making. It's the right way to go, if we have time to do it.
As long as it doesn't take as long as the animal control.
That's
I
going
think
to be
you're-
up to us to control
I think
that.
1 month is a pipe dream, if you think this is going to happen in a month. I don't see any way in the good green earth that's going to happen. And if you need to know that information pretty soon, then I don't see any other way but for staff to work with it. I mean, I think we all agree that this needs to be done, but we've had this 4 or 5 months ago, so it would be ready for next year's budget, you know. I would like to see some information from other communities on their rate structures and things like that, so we're not kind of flying too blind.
Elizabeth, did you have something?
Yes.
Go ahead. I think you were going to say something.
I know the 2 months sounds like it can't be done, but I can assure you that we can certainly execute it. It's whether you can establish the committee working group fast
That's what I'm
enough.
talking about.
Yeah. But here's another idea. It just hit me while I'm sitting there, because I do this a lot, and I do it all over North America. Our Canadian friends have figured out that the U.S. finally got their act together on this, and so I do a lot of utility work now in Canada. But one of the things that we've found very effective in communities is rather than establish a committee, have us go out as a team and sit down with and brief organizations like the Chamber, or have a working conversation with a group of folks that are business leaders, to outreach and have a conversation with some folks that may represent the environmental concerns, the water quality side of this, and have us do a series of, over a couple of days, just meet and greet, and here's what the study said, this is where we are, what's your general reaction? Please help us bring back to council, your commission, your thoughts. What are the things you see as stumbling blocks? What are the things that can be supportive to what the community needs to accomplish? And to get folks involved, to reach out to organizations that do represent the elderly or disadvantaged, the faith-based community, where we could spend a couple of days in town and get this information into their hands and ask for them. Again, it's not quite the same thing as establishing a group where we can really educate them so thoroughly and they really can help form a decision, but they can inform us in a way that we can then work with staff, create what ultimately then does become a staff-driven recommendation, but certainly with engagement and conversation in the community.
We did that in another community I did when we were facing a very large, well, it was to them because it was a $4 million in a very small community, $4 million investment for wastewater, a decision of the type of plant that they were going to go to. And so, yeah, we could do that too.
And again, it's a great way to get the message out, to get them to be able to hear some of the complexity. We can answer questions, but most importantly, we can hear feedback. You know, what are their concerns, and what values do they have? What do they need to bring back to you in their values around this issue and what's important to them in the community? So I offer that as another way to get community input and thought into the process that then ultimately we can sit down with Greg and Cheryl and come back then with, maybe it's more than one recommendation. Maybe there are different ways we can cut this pie up and offer you some alternatives that can look at various issues and how we could address them. I offer that as an option.
No, I appreciate that. That's a great way to go. And we've done something similar. It's kind of getting the community consensus, which works extremely well. We can do it with groups of 80, which has worked, or even larger groups. I like addressing the civic groups. It's for us to determine, but I appreciate that you being available to do that. Are you traveling far, though?
I travel far every week.
At least we know we got Topeka right here, so we got
My suitcase is always packed.
an A bag and a B bag, I know.
The thing I like about, I guess, trying to include in some type of form a larger group of people to get more of consensus as opposed to pointing a few folks, because I think the ultimate thing is usually going to come back, well, those people don't represent me and what I want, my thoughts, or that
That's true.
it was too narrow of a selection of folks. So I kind of like the idea of and I think at least since I've been on the commission a couple of times that we've had, and as long as we get the notice out and communicate as to the importance of why folks need to be attending a forum like that, I think we've had pretty decent turnout and good information feedback. But that becomes the most important part, is that hey, we're going to have these forums, here's what it's going to be about, and why you need to be there, so that you can give your opinion. Then I think that could be very valuable. I like the thing of having the professionals there, somewhat running that particular type of forum and being able to give the detailed answers that's needed, as opposed to on that small group. So that's my 2 cents.
I think that's a good idea, and I think we need to get more information out to many as people as we can. But I do want to say that in our community, folks are taxed beyond their available means. Water's going up, sewer's going up. Now we're talking about stormwater going up. Something's got to go. And if we have regulatory requirements, those have to be taken care of. And I think everybody understands, and I think the community understands, if we have a regulatory requirement, those have to be met. So I'm thinking the minimum, the very minimum, to be able to satisfy the state. We can't afford any more, and there's something that's got to go. If water goes up, sewer goes up, trash goes up, stormwater goes up, something's got to go. I don't know what that is, but we're talking about critical services for a city. Not would like to have, not here's what I think we're going to need in 15 years. Based on what we did 10 years ago, this is what we're going to do next year. I can't buy that. I just, minimal, critical needs, and whatever that cost is above where we're at, something's got to go. I don't know what that is, but I believe that the community would have voice in that and would say, I'd rather not have street lights on for the next year than pay $120 for stormwater versus $60. And that's essentially what you're saying. Our businesses that are taxed at a double rate of what residents are have already threatened to leave. Several have threatened to leave because of taxes and because of what they pay for taxes. And we're talking about that one unit that you described at $384 a year to $1,560 a year. That's enough to throw somebody over the edge. So something, I like the idea of balancing and right-sizing, but something's got to go. It doesn't add up. We can't afford it. So minimal, critical, this is another tough one. I think the animal control will be a walk in the park compared to taking money out of people's pockets. But thanks for your idea.
I think reaching out to the community is probably the best idea I've heard tonight.
We can make it so.
I just wanted to note that this surely was probably the most difficult part of this master plan, and that the one thing we knew going in, we all knew, is that our current rate structure, we know it doesn't work. It was a rate structure that we took from another community, we put on Junction City and said, here we are. We've been collecting on it, we've not put it in abeyance. We're trying to right-size, I guess I want to call it, the system, and I fully agree with you, Commissioner McAllister, on saying that we want to do the bare minimum. And I think I shared this with the AMAC staff, saying that this community, and I surely know the elected officials, are not going to buy the aspect of taking somebody's stormwater fee, if they use the example, paying $1,200 a year, and now all of a sudden you're paying $15,000 a year. Is that enough for that large user to close their door? You know, I don't even think we want to broach that, but I think what we're looking to do is, and I think that's a very good probably means for us to exercise that, is reach out to the community and say, what do you think is fair and equitable as far as on getting some median in there, knowing that, you know what, if it's not passed on to that user because they are using the service, it's fair and equitable, others are going to have to balance that out, because we know that at the end of the day, the service costs X amount, and it's just a matter of which percentage is covering that portion of the pie, I think is what we're after, and be able to deliver that at least to you, to say, here's the policy recommendation that we have, and I think that will allow us then further to define, I'm going to call it the financial business plan, and then in turn define what is the rate that we should be setting those all at. You know, and I want to call it the equivalent unit factor. So I think we can go forward as far as reaching out as far as to the community and schedule those with several, I want to call it civic groups. And then likewise, as Commissioner Landis mentioned, to say, hey, what are others doing? I do know in my conversations with AMAC, a lot of other communities are, I mean, they're biting the bullet and they're saying, you know what, you pay your fair share. And if that means that your rate is $15,000, you're paying $15,000. Because this resident, they're not paying anything, you know, more than what their fair share is. So I think we can surely share those kind of numbers, because we've already heard a little bit from that of AMAC, but I think I think we felt uncomfortable saying, do we put it in the laps of all five of you with a staff recommendation, knowing that, yeah, there could be that, I'm going to call it the public backlash or the business backlash. We surely don't want to have that. And I know I've had some conversations already with business individuals saying, you know what, we are looking at this, and fully expect that something that you have today, the recommendation we ultimately will come back, at least in our minds, will be something entirely different. It's going to be a little bit more fair and equitable, but we may have to have some kind of balancing means, and that's all I wanted to know.
The fairness issue that was specifically directed at me almost 4 years ago now was I have a fourplex. I'm paying the 120 or 36 times 4 a year, and Walmart's only paying $100 a month, and they're 20 times bigger than me. Why is that fair? Well, it's not. That's what I said to him. I can't tell you that's not. I agree with you. It's not fair. And they're certainly not, the fourplex is certainly not bringing in the revenue that Walmart does.
I think we got your direction, which is, you know, reach out to the community and then come back with you, and I think we can do that.
along with the additional
Data
information.
from other communities, too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We can do
I
that.
think we can do that. All right,
Thank you.
any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. Move to adjourn?
Second.